Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we will see what if Naruto was kidnapped from the village, and was left to die. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. The village hidden in the leaves or Konoha was a relatively peaceful village. Sure, there was the occasional conflict that would spring up, but it was nothing that didn't happen everywhere else. One would think that a place where they would beat a child just for the fun of it would not be in a peaceful village. But it so happens that there were some who did do this, and all because the child in question had done nothing wrong other than being born in the wrong place at the wrong time. You see, when the child was born, a great and terrible creature called the Kyuubi no Kitsune or nine-tailed demon fox had attacked the village the day of his birth. It had ravaged the village until the village's greatest hero had come riding a giant toad carrying a newborn baby, and sealed it away, sacrificing his life in the process and wishing that his son would be seen as a hero. But it was not to be. The child in question, who was named Naruto Uzumaki, was made into a Jinchuriki or human sacrifice in other terms. And since that day he had had a life that was as close to hell as it could be. Even though the third Hokage, who was like a grandfather to him and had forbidden everyone from talking about his burden, in hopes that Naruto would have some semblance of a normal childhood. But instead, in his young life, Naruto had been beaten since he could walk, denied food and clothes from stores. What little he could get was no good to wear, as they were basically rags, and the only food he could get at a fair price was from a small ramen stand. He was small for his age due to not having the right nutrients in his diet. At the moment, Naruto had just gotten back from a special dinner at Ichiraku Ramen the Hokage had treated him to, and had just turned into bed with a small smile on his face. At least not everyone hates me, he thought, thinking of the aged Kage and the family that ran the ramen stand. As he drifted off to blissful sleep, he never noticed two masked figures come out from the shadows. They took one look at the sleeping 4-year-old, turned to each other and nodded. While one bent down to pick him up, the other took out a bag that was big enough to hold him. When they had slipped him into the bag, they took off through the window. Finally, the village will be rid of the demon brat, one said in a gruff voice as they jumped from roof to roof heading for the village wall. Yes, we will, though not like there are many that would miss him, the other said, and you could practically feel the smirk on his face. The one holding the bag, Naruto, nodded to his accomplice as they jumped over the gate and into the trees. They traveled in silence until they reached the borders of the lands of rain and fire. This is as good of a spot as any, the one who was holding the bag said as he set it down, and they both took off back towards Konoha. Next morning, Naruto opened his eyes and then shut them due to the sunlight blinding him. When he opened them again slowly to allow them to adjust, he saw that he was in an unfamiliar place. What he saw was that he was surrounded by forests on either side of him. Where am I? He thought shakily, looking around to see that he couldn't see anything but forest. Sighing sadly, he looked down and started to sob to himself. So this is how they decided to put an end to the demon. They kidnapped and left me here on my own, he thought, pulling his knees up to his chest and wrapping his arms around them as he cried. It took an hour or two for him to calm down, and when he did, he stood up and started walking in a random direction. It's no use crying about it anymore, so might as well try to make it back to Konoha. Not like they would be happy to see me. He added the last part with a small growl in the back of his throat. Little did he know, but the direction he was walking in was the exact opposite of Konoha. 4 days later, we find little Naruto trudging along a path, and quite honestly he looked like shit. He had been walking for 4 days, only stopping to rest at night. He hadn't eaten anything in that time span either, as he did not have any hunting or fishing skills. The garbage he regularly dug for would look like a king's feast to him at the moment. He sighed sadly as his stomach demanded food again in an almost earth-shaking growl. But that was the least of his worries. He felt so tired due to the lack of food and having hardly any rest in the last few days that he could hardly walk. He had just managed to make it to the top of a hill before he collapsed in exhaustion. An hour later, two figures, a man and a woman, were walking down the same path. The man had bright orange hair, an angular but round face, and brown eyes, and the girl had dark blue hair, a pale angular face, and orange eyes. They were both wearing the same clothing, that being a plain black cloak. The only difference between the two was that the girl had an earring pierced through her bottom lip and a paper rose in her hair. They were recently wed Yahiko and Konan Harakin, rebels of the Hidden Rain trying to stop Hanzo the Salamander's rule over AIM and bring peace to the region. They were just about to reach the top of the hill when they saw something lying on the ground in front of them. Rushing towards the person, Conan bent over him to inspect his state. "Oh Kami. Yahiko-kun, it's a child," Conan said in surprise as she did a few hand signs and her hands lit up in green light. She placed her hands just above his chest, running a diagnostic jutsu. She gasped in horror at what she found and burst into tears. Yahiko rushed to his wife and immediately enveloped her into a hug. "What's wrong, Conan-chan?" he asked softly. All she did was sob into his cloak, clutching at him tightly. It was then that he got a good look at the boy, and what he saw appalled him. The poor child was so thin that he could see his bones through his skin. It was obvious that the kid hadn't eaten in quite a while. But that wasn't all he saw. As his eyes ran over the boy's chest, he saw that his shirt was raised slightly and that there seemed to be a seal on it. His eyes widened as realization hit him: this boy's a Jinchuriki. But what's he doing out here? Did someone in the village he belonged to bring him out here and leave him to die? He thought, and if he was right, then this wasn't the only thing that was wrong due to how his wife broke down. He turned his head to look down at his wife, who had started to calm down, and asked in a soft voice, "What's his condition, Conan-chan?" Conan cleared the tears from her eyes before going through more hand signs, and once again her hands glowed a light green. "He's severely underfed. And has numerous internal injuries that have been mostly healed, but that's not the worst of it all," she said, and began tearing up again, causing Yahiko to place a comforting hand on her shoulder as she healed the young boy in front of them. "It's obvious to me that he's been beaten numerous times and was as recently as 6 days ago," she said as tears started to stream down her face. "At the moment I'm making sure that he is safe to be moved, then we'll have to make sure to get something down him as soon as he awakes," she finished. It took a few moments for her to finish, but when the glow died down, and she gently scooped him up into her arms. "He's safe to move now, Yahiko-kun," she said as they both started walking and looked down at the face of the boy and saw something that they both had missed. He had 3 whiskers on each of his cheeks. Yahiko became even more convinced that the boy was a Jinchuriki. "Okay, now I'm almost certain. But the only Jinchuriki that I have known to ever have any obvious markings was Mito Uzumaki, and she was the container of the Kyuubi," he thought, and his eyes once again widened. "Then that means that he belonged to the Leaf Village. But if they have treated their Jinchuriki like this, and a child no less, then I don't think that they deserve the great favor he's doing them all by keeping the beast at bay," he thought, before he turned to Conan, who had a look of wonder on her face at the sight of the birthmarks. "Conan-chan?" he asked, slowly gaining her attention. He paused a moment to decide how to tell his wife of his suspicions. "I think that the boy is a Jinchuriki," he finally said, making Conan widen her eyes in surprise. But Yahiko-kun, if that was true, then he would belong to a hidden village, not treated like this and left to die," she said, making Yahiko nod, but she continued, "Remember what Jiraiya-sensei said about the one Jinchuriki he knew? He said that she was treated with respect, almost worshipped even," she finished, now holding Naruto tightly, almost as a mother would. Yahiko nodded his head again and said, "Yes, I remember what Jiraiya-sensei said. But if I'm right about what one he holds, then the village that treated him this way and the beast that Mito Uzumaki held are one and the same." What he had said made his wife's eyes widen even further, and she placed her arm around Naruto as if to shield him from some unseen attacker. But then that would mean that he belongs to Konoha and that he holds the Kyuubi," she said in shock, but that fell when she felt Naruto shift in her arms and mumble something that sounded like, "Ka-san." Hearing this made her smile slightly and then look at her husband with a bright determination in her eyes. "I will not let this child go back to a village that would rather see him dead for what he holds. I will adopt him if I must," she exclaimed. Yahiko nodded to her with a small smile. "I was thinking the same thing just now, Conan-chan," he said. Conan looked at him gratefully and then to their new son. Little did they know that this decision would shake not only this world but one other in the coming future. Naruto groggily opened his eyes, and didn't know where he was, or how he was alive. The last thing he could remember was passing out on a hill from a mix of exhaustion and starvation. Then the next he wakes up here, and he was confused as hell. "Where am I? How'd I get here?" Looking around, he noticed that he was in a very nice room. He was on the bed that was in the center. A chair was sitting next the bed, like someone had been watching him. There was a small dresser over in the corner, and a door leading to somewhere else. Now he was starting to get anxious. He had never been in a situation like this before, The only times he was ever in a room this good was his many visits to the hospital. And even then he didn't have any good experiences, as the doctors refused to heal him right. Deciding to get out of here while he could, he swung the blankets off him, and got out of the bed. The only problem was that when he tried to stand he fell flat on his back, and the fall caused a loud boom sound that he was sure was heard in the next room and probably alerting whoever had found him. His suspicions were proven correct when a woman with blue hair that had a paper rose in it came into the room with a concerned look on her face. That look immediately changed to that of surprise, and she smiled slightly at him. "Oh good, you're up. I had begun to worry," she said, approaching him, only to stop when he tried to back away with a look of fear on his face. "Pete, please don't come near me," he said, still trying to back away using his elbows and feet. All she could do was look at him worried before she raised her hands to show that she wasn't going to hurt him, and even then he still looked scared. "I'm not going to hurt you. My husband and I were the ones who found you, and brought you here," she said, making him somewhat less anxious, but he still looked a little scared. "How do I know I can trust you?" Conan looked thoughtful for a while before she let out a sigh and shrugged. "I guess you can't. But you have my word, neither I nor my husband will hurt you," she said, causing him to finally nod and relax. Seeing he had accepted her answer, she slowly approached him, noticing he stiffened ever so slightly. Bending down, she gently picked him up and set him back on the bed. As she stood up and was about to sit in the chair next to the bed, his stomach let out a monstrous growl demanding food. She giggled when she saw him turn his head away in embarrassment. "I can see that you're hungry. I'll go and whip something up for you, so please, just stay in bed and rest," she said, and walked out of the room. When she left, Naruto had started to think on what was happening. Was she hired to kill him, or had she been truthful in what she said? Thinking to when she had came in and he had started to back away in fear, he had saw a hurt look cross her face, and that her eyes held no ill will towards him, just the desire to help. Sighing, he decided that he would see how this played out and then go from there. It was then that he smelt a wonderful aurora coming from the next room, and his stomach gave another growl, causing him to sigh and think, "Man, that smells good." It took another 10 minutes for the blue-haired person to come back with a tray loaded with food of all kind. There was rice, fish, some bread, a cup of milk, and ramen. At the sight of his favorite food, he was literally drooling. Seeing Naruto's mouth open and a river of saliva coming from it made Conan giggle as she set the food in front of the child that she and Yahiko rescued. Once the food was set in front of him, Naruto picked up the ramen she had prepared, gave it an attentive taste, which caused his eyes to widen, making Conan look at him in worry before he started inhaling it at a speed that she thought wasn't possible. As soon as he was done with the ramen, he picked up the fish and ate that at high speeds as well, and her eyes widened at seeing that he was still eating as fast as he was. He moved on to the rice when he finished the fish and started to slow a bit on how he ate, but he still kept up a fast pace. Seeing how he was literally inhaling the food she had prepared, Conan was looking like a fish out of water. "Dear Cammy. Either he hasn't eaten in days, or she hadn't, or is my cooking that good?" she thought as she gaped at him. Meanwhile, as Naruto finished off the rice and picked up the bread, he was thinking, "Oh my Cammy. Her cooking is the best I've ever had. Even better than Ichiraku's." When he had finished the bread, he quickly downed the glass of milk and patted his stomach contentedly, satisfied now that it was full. When he looked up, he saw that his hostess was gaping at him in surprise. When she realized he was looking at her, Conan gave a small smile. "Were you that hungry, or was my cooking that good?" she asked jokingly. "Both," he said back with a small grin of his own. "Sorry for not introducing myself, but I'm Naruto Uzumaki," he said, and then his expression turned serious. "However, I must ask, who are you? And why are you helping me?" Her expression did not change, but you could tell by her eyes she was wondering just what this kid could have gone through to be this mature and to warrant such questions. "My name is Conan Harakin, and my husband's name is Yahiko. He's out getting supplies at the moment. But as to why we're helping you, is that judging by the condition you were in when we found you, we have an idea of what you've gone through in your life," she said, causing him to look at her skeptically. "No, you don't," he said in a deathly quiet voice. His lifeless tone sent shivers up Conan's spine. "Were you ever beaten on a daily basis?" he asked in the same quiet voice, and she shook her head in the negative. "Were you ever glared at and not know what you've done to warrant such a stare?" Again a shake of the head, Were you ever starved only eating when you could find something in the garbage, when you got the nerve up to steal it, or when someone you see as a grandfather got the time to check on you? He asked again, this time causing her to nod. Her nod made him stop and stare at her in surprise. How is it you know what it is like to go hungry? Conan looked off in the distance before she replied, Yahiko, a good friend of ours, and myself were orphans of war, she said, drawing another look of surprise from Naruto. Yahiko's and my own parents were killed in the Second Shinobi War. I was all alone for a while, barely being able to find food to survive another day, she said with a grim look before it changed into a bright smile. But then I met Yahiko, and a good friend named Nagato. We looked after each other until we found someone to train us in the ninja arts for a bit. Conan paused here when Naruto perked up at the ninja bit and she smirked to herself. Looks like little Naruto wants to be a ninja. But she continued telling her story. Our sensei trained us to the best he could, until we were strong enough to look after ourselves. It was still wartime and we began looking for ways to stop it and created a group called Akatsuki to find ways to do so. Here her expression turned to somber, unfortunately. She continued in a solemn voice, during one of the battles Nagato was poisoned. He would live for a good deal of time after the war, but it came at a cost. While he would live, he would also become weaker in time. He died just over 2 years ago. At seeing her now tearing expression, Naruto slowly and shakily leaned up enough to reach out and embrace her in a hug. I'm sorry that I made you remember that, he said softly. Her response was to wrap her arms around him. It's okay, Naruto-chan. It's good to remember Nagato even if it hurts. Conan said, her voice soft as well. But there was something that Yahiko-kun and I wanted to ask you, she said, making him lean back enough to look at her with a questioning look. She gulped in nervousness before she asked in an equally nervous voice, would it be alright if Yahiko-kun and I adopted you? At her question, Naruto's mind went into a haze and a voice was going, warning, computer is overloaded. Shutting down, rebooting, analyzing recent information analyzed. She wants to adopt you, reacting accordingly, it said, and immediately Naruto burst into tears and buried his head into her shirt, muttering, thank you, repeatedly. Conan was surprised at his reaction and just held him tight, smiling softly as she did so. It took a good hour for him to calm down, and when he did so she asked, is that a yes? Naruto nodded, wiping some tears away. When he looked up he had a megawatt smile on his face. Thank you, he said again, Ka-san. He finished testing out the word, making Conan smile with tears of joy in her eyes, and she hugged him again. They were interrupted when they heard a door in the next room open and shut, and a male voice called out, Conan-chan, I'm back. When she heard that, Conan yelled back in an extremely happy voice, I'm in here, Yahiko-kun, and I have great news. An instant later, and said man was standing in the open doorway observing the scene before him with a smile on his face. I take it you asked him? He asked, hoping for the best. Seeing his wife nod, Yahiko's smile quickly mirrored that of Naruto's. That's great, he said, wrapping them both in a hug. One that Naruto found a little awkward due to the fact that he didn't know this man, but figured that this was his new Tusan. Feeling Naruto go stiff, Yahiko released them from the hug and grinned sheepishly at him. Sorry little one, but I'm Conan's husband, Yahiko Harakan. And judging from the scene and that you're both happy you agreed to be adopted, he said, and Naruto nodded, both in understanding and happiness, with a small grin of his own as he sat in his new mother's lap. Yahiko-kun, Conan said, drawing both of the boys' attention, I would like you to officially meet our son, Naruto Uzumaki Harakan. 3 years later. It had taken Naruto a while to get used to family life, but once he embraced it with a bright exuberance. Every morning he would wake up, shower, and help Conan in the kitchen making breakfast. Afterwards he would help her clean up, and then they would move on to shinobi training. Now, that was something that had taken some time to get ready for, because his body was so weak it had taken 3 months for it to get to the level that it could handle a minimum workout. But thankfully they didn't start him on the exercises right away. What they had done was help him start to calm his mind to access his chakra. What that was basically meditating, and strangely he took to it like a fish to water. He had managed to access his chakra after an hour of meditating. And what a show that was! As soon as he tapped into it there was a shock wave sent out. If they hadn't focused their own chakra to their feet to stay attached to the ground, Yahiko and Conan would have been sent flying away. And even then they were knocked back a few feet. When they looked up they saw that Naruto was literally covered in swirling chakra. But what really surprised them was that the chakra was outlined in red. They took that as a sign to tell him of his Jinchuriki status, now that he could use his chakra, and wanted to make sure that he didn't accidentally use Kyuubi's. When they had gone to tell him, all he did was look at them weirdly and ask what a Jinchuriki was. Once informed of what a Jinchuriki was, how one was made, and how most lived, he had put the pieces together and hung his head low and asked why they didn't hate him. Conan replied while taking him into her arms that they didn't see him as the beast, and only as the jailer, and Yahiko had agreed. After getting over the shock of what he held, Naruto had asked them to up his training. When asked why he wanted to, he said that he wanted to become as strong as he could to help them in the civil war that Hanzo the Salamander had caused due to his ruling. And from that day on, training had been the second closest thing to hell that Naruto had experienced, the first being his life before he met his adopted parents. He had learned several chakra control exercises, and now had a fit body that someone twice his age would still be working hard to get, the replacement technique, the transformation, and one extremely helpful jutsu, the shadow clone. When they had learned that he had more chakra than both of them combined, Conan and Yahiko had decided to teach him this jutsu to speed up his training. The key to this jutsu was that whenever he made a clone and sent it to do something while he did something else, when it dispelled, the original would gain the knowledge of what the clone had been doing. Though the downside was that it couldn't transfer muscular memory or improvement. Another thing that they found out was that Naruto was a kinesthetic learner. Meaning that he learned by doing the task. You could explain the jutsu exercise and he would get the basic of what had to be done, but he actually had to do the task to fully understand it. They had to do most of the jutsu work this way. Here we find Naruto and his adopted parents in the middle of the training field that they often use, and Naruto was wondering what they were doing, as they had told him to put a hold on the shadow clone training for a moment. But little did he know that Yahiko had brought him here for some special training. It was time they found out his element so that he could start learning more powerful jutsu. So Ka-san, Tu-san, what are we doing today? Naruto asked curiously, making Yahiko smile at his son's excitement to learn, and decided to humor him. Well, Naru-chan, Naruto puffed his checks at the nickname, causing Conan to giggle. We've decided that it's time that we learn what your elemental affinity is. He said, causing Naruto's expression to morph in one of pure joy. Really, Tu-san? I'm finally going to find out what my affinity is, he asked in excitement. He had been looking forward to this since the day he learned what elemental chakra was, which was almost 2 years now. His expression made Yahiko nod in amusement and Conan to giggle again as they remembered the point in their own training where they and Nagato found out their elements. Yep, and here's the means to do so, Yahiko said as he produced 2 slips of chakra paper from his hip pouch and handing one to Naruto. Naruto just stared blankly at what he assumed was just a normal piece of paper, and he made his thoughts known. Tu-san? How is a piece of paper going to help find my affinity? He asked with a questioning look. Yahiko sighed with a sweat drop as he remembered that he, Conan and Nagato had the same reaction to when Jiraiya showed them how it was done. This Naruto is called chakra paper, he said, drawing a confused look from his son. Conan, seeing her son's confusion, started to explain. Chakra paper, she began, drawing Naruto's attention to her, is made from special trees that feed on chakra. And due to that it has a different reaction to the nature of an individual. For example, if someone has fire it will ignite and turn to ash, wind it will split in two, lightning it'll wrinkle, earth will make it turn to dirt and crumble away, and finally water. She paused here so Yahiko could add chakra to the paper in his hand. The result was the paper becoming soggy. Will cause the paper to become either damp or soggy depending on how strong your affinity is. Yahiko finished. All Naruto did was stare in awe at the remains of the paper. Now he couldn't wait to try it out for himself. Conan and Yahiko merely smiled at their son's reaction as they had similar ones when Jiraiya showed them. After a minute Naruto snapped out of his odd state and stared at his parents with a confused look. What's wrong, Naru-chan? Conan asked, seeing his look. He hesitated a bit before asking, has anyone ever had all 5 elements? His question threw them for a loop as they had been expecting something else, but it did bring someone from the past up in their minds. Nagato, they thought in remembrance. Snapping out of their remembering, they saw Naruto looking at them with an expectant look. Actually, there was someone who had all 5, but he had a bloodline to do so. Yahiko said, causing Naruto to nod, before he looked down at his paper and concentrated chakra into it. What happened surprised them a bit. When he had sent chakra to it, the chakra paper had split in two and one side wrinkled into a ball, while the other lit up in a bright flare of fire. A nature triple affinity for wind, lightning and fire, Yahiko stated with a whistle. Very impressive. Is that rare to San? Naruto asked. Extremely, Naruto, Yahiko answered. While a triple affinity isn't unheard of, most shinobi only have one. Natural dual affinities are usually found in clans. The Senju, for instance, had affinities for both water and earth, thus leading to the creation of the Shodem Hokage's wood style. He explained. Natural triple affinities, however, are even rarer than those. Holders of those only pop up once in a generation. The elements themselves, though, are what amazed me. Why is that? Naruto asked, wondering why his particular elements could have amazed his Tusan. Because, Naruto, Yahiko sighed. Not only do you have wind and lightning, two of the rarest elements I might add, but you also have fire, which if used right can be extremely destructive. An example of how would be if you used a fire jutsu in conjunction with a wind jutsu, then you could possibly make a low C rank into a high A rank, or if you did the same with water and lightning it could be quite devastating. Yahiko explained as Konan nodded in agreement. His explanation made Naruto's eyes go wide in surprise at how destructive his elements could be. But, Konan said, drawing his attention again, now that you actually knew your elements you need to learn how to actually use and manipulate them, which normally would take years, but due to your vast reserves and being able to use a vast amount of shadow clones you can take it down to a matter of months, if not weeks. She said, making Naruto nod. Now, it's time to get to work. Yahiko donning a grin that promised pain, which was mirrored by Konan. Their usual, training is going to be torture, grin. Naruto gulped in fear. It was several hours later that Naruto stumbled into his room, both physically and mentally exhausted from his training. After learning about how to manipulate his elements, which was for wind leaf cutting, lightning leaf wrinkling, and fire leaf burning, he had made 80 shadow clones, 60 of them working on the elemental manipulation, 20 for each, and 20 for chakra control exercises. While they went off to do those he had spared with his parents. Needless to say he was put through the ringer, again. He groaned in pain as he dropped into bed thinking for the umpteenth time, what have I gotten myself into? All he could say was thank Kami for the shadow clone. As if it wasn't for them he wouldn't have the time to work on everything he had learned thus far, and would probably be in even more pain than he was now. As he drifted off to sleep he had no idea on who he would be meeting tonight. As Naruto opened his eyes he found that he was in a sewer that had dull red ting at the end of the corridor. Looking around more he saw glowing pipes all going, and coming from the same direction. The colors that the pipes glowed were different and varied in size. The smallest was glowing a bright blue, and was on both walls going to and from, but almost encompassed the wall going to wherever they did. The biggest was a dark red in color. It very aura radiated malice and hate, but for some reason those were drowned out by an immense feeling of sadness. Those pipes were coming from the direction of where Naruto figured was the source of all the red. Well, might as well see if there's a way out of here, he thought, starting to walk to the red light. As he started to get closer he could swear that he could hear the sound of crying coming from wherever it was that he was walking to. The sound got louder with every step he took and he quickened his pace to see who it was that was crying. As it got louder the closer he got to the end of the corridor he broke into a run. As he turned a corner at the end he caught sight of a giant cage that had bars that reached the ceiling and a seal tag that had the kanji for seal in the center. His eyes widened in realization at where he must be and what was inside the cage. This must be my mind. The cage has got to hold the Kyuubi, he thought. But what surprised him was that whoever was crying was inside of the cage, and as he stepped closer he noticed someone, a girl, if he was right, huddled in the back sobbing like no tomorrow. Okay, now I'm confused. Who's this girl and where's the Kyuubi? He thought, trying to figure out what was going on. Hello? He called, stepping up to the cage, and startling the girl in the process. Who's there? Came a scared voice in response. I am, Naruto said. The girl turned around and her eyes widened when she caught sight of him. Naruto-kun, she said softly as more tears poured from her eyes. Seeing this, Naruto stepped through the bars and wrapped his arms around her, causing her to stiffen. Why are you crying? He asked softly. The response he got was the girl burying her head into his shoulder, sobbing worse than she had been, and muttering, "I'm sorry," over and over again. Now Naruto felt a little awkward. He had only once been in this kind of position, and that had been when he first met Konan and Yahiko. So he went on instinct, just holding her tight and rubbing her back softly. Taking a look at the rest of the girl in his arms, Naruto saw that she had bright red hair, from which he saw that there were 2 black-tipped red fox ears. What the? He thought in surprise at seeing them. She can't be who I think she is. Can she? He thought, having a pretty good idea about who the girl in his arms was. Checking further, he saw that attached to the base of her spine were 9 fluffy fox tails, which were laying flat on the ground behind her, signifying that she was feeling sad and depressed. Now he was gaping in shock. This is the Kyuubi? He thought in shock, but I thought that it was a creature of mass destruction, not this gentle and vulnerable girl. If this is the Kyuubi, then how could she have caused all that damage to Konoha if she was like that? He thought, now figuring that something was up, so he just continued to rub her back, and ask his questions when he had the chance. It took her half an hour to calm herself. When she looked up at him, and saw that he had a confused look on his face, and she started to get worried. Does he know? She thought nervously. Naruto, seeing that she had calmed, took a look at her face, and saw what he could say was one of the most beautiful women he had ever seen. She had a round but angular face, bright blue eyes which were red and puffy due to her crying, and a small button nose. But despite how beautiful she was, he needed to get something straight. Kyuubi-san. Her eyes widened in fear as he knew who she was. "Why are you crying?" he asked as he looked directly into her eyes, and seeing nothing but fear, and sighed as he embraced her again, making her stiffen once more. "Please, I just want to talk. I'm not going to hurt you." When she realized that he wasn't going to hurt her like he said, she sighed quietly. "I was crying because I just saw your memories of what your life was like," she said in an equally quiet voice. Her answer made Naruto's breath catch in his throat. If she had seen his memories, then that meant that she had seen every beating, every hate-filled glare, everything. His eyes narrowed when a thought struck him. "What do you mean by just watched my memories? If you were here the whole time, doesn't that mean that you could watch them as they actually happened?" he asked, releasing her so that they could look at each other as they spoke. Kyuubi's eyes widened when she heard him ask this and feared for the worst, and decided to explain. "Yes, it means that I could have been able to watch them as they happened," she said, making his eyes narrow further. "But," she said quickly when she saw this, "I wasn't able to, because I just woke up." Now Naruto had a look of confusion on his face. "Huh?" was all he could say. Kyuubi giggled a little at his expression and unknowingly making Naruto blush, before her face turned to downcast again. "I better explain the full story," she said. "I didn't mean to attack the leaf," she started, causing him to look even more confused. "But you should know, you aren't my first Jinchuriki," Kyuubi said, and Naruto's eyes could have been rolling on the floor due to how wide they had become when she said that, and so she explained how she had had 2 Jinchuriki before him, one of them being his birth mother, how a masked man had come and ripped her out of Kushina, killing her in the process, and cast a powerful genjutsu over her, forcing her to go into a rage and attack the closest thing in sight, that being Konoha at the time. How she had been sealed into him by the 4th Hokage, been put into a deep sleep due to the sealing, and that she had just woken up and viewed his memories and couldn't handle how horrible his life was because of her attack, thus why she was crying. Needless to say, after learning all this, Naruto was speechless. Probably for the first time in his life. It took him a while to process the information he had just been given, and when he did, he sighed and rubbed his sore head. "Okay, so you were sealed inside my birth mother," he said, making her nod. "And when she went into labor with me, someone attacked her and ripped you out of her." Another nod. "You attacked Konoha due to being put into a genjutsu." A nod. "The 4th sealed you into me, and put you into a sleep due to the sealing." Again a nod. "And you just woke up, and instantly viewed my memories to see what you had missed and saw what kind of life I had." He finished, making her give a final nod. Again Naruto rubbed his head. "All right, I believe you," he said, causing Kyuubi to look at him weirdly. Seeing this, Naruto raised a brow. "What?" he asked as she continued to look at him. "You believe all that even after all that I ended up putting you through?" she asked, making him chuckle a bit as he nodded his head. "Yeah, I do. I really don't know why, but something here," he pointed to his heart, "is telling me that believing you is the right thing to do," he said. Kyuubi blushed at the meaning of his words. Naruto was oblivious to what the meaning of what he said meant. Hey, he may be smarter, but he is only 7 at this point in time and doesn't know what romantic feelings are or how to deal with them. But, he said in a low voice as his head lowered, causing the Kyuubi to look worried again, please, I must know, did she love me? Kyuubi just looked at him before grinning slightly and replied in a soft and happy voice, yes, she did. She said, and Naruto looked up to her with tear-filled eyes, happy to know that he wasn't abandoned, and that he had a parent's love even before he was born. And my father? He asked. Kyuubi frowned as she tried to think of something to tell him about the man that he was asking about. Yes, she knew who he was, but due to promising him to not tell him, other than what she thought was necessary, until Naruto was ready, she couldn't tell him much. She sighed as she decided what she could say to him. Your father, she trailed and saw Naruto leaning in eagerly. Well, I can't say much until you're ready, but he was a great man, and an even greater ninja. Not to mention a god, she said, and then thought, causing him to deflate a bit at not having much information. However, she started deciding that a little bit of a half-lie wouldn't hurt. He was a very noble man and sacrificed himself to save you and try to save your mother, she said with a look of remembrance. Her answer brought a good deal of happiness to Naruto. While it was true that he now had a happy life with Yahiko and Konan, he had always wanted to know about his real parents. Now I think it's time for you to go, Naruto-kun, it's almost morning. But before you do, my name is Helena, she said, and giggled a bit as he sighed and muttered a soft curse. He looked up and nodded. I'll be back tonight then, Lena-chan, he said with a grin as he vanished, leaving a blushing Helena, due to the pet name. Snapping out of her embarrassment, she saw that her host was gone, and she sighed sadly. Hurry back, Naruto-kun, she muttered. Outside the mindscape, when Naruto woke up that morning, he had a wide smile on his face. When asked by either Yahiko or Konan what he was so happy about, all he did was just shrug and say, I just feel this way, and left it at that. He didn't tell them that he had met with Kyuubi, or Helena as she liked to be called, because he thought that they wouldn't believe that the attack wasn't her fault. However, unknown to him, Yahiko had talked to Konan about once Naruto got enough training he could start working with the rebels. Meaning that he would start doing the missions that could ultimately save the Rain Village, and this would include killing as well. Konan had been against the notion of her son starting his career like that and this early. But Yahiko had convinced her that it was time for him to see what the world of Shinobi was really like. Alright, Naruto, Yahiko said as they walked onto the training field that they had been using the day before. Before we begin today, we have something to tell you, he said as his face changed from the usual smile he had to serious. Naruto knew he had better listen to what his father had to say. We believe that it's time for you to begin helping us in the war against Hanzo, he announced, making Naruto look at him wide-eyed. But, San, am I really ready for that kind of thing? He asked nervously. He knew this day would come, but he didn't expect so soon. At the moment? No, Yahiko told him, making him frown but keep his mouth shut. But with the training that we're going to give you, you will be ready by the end of the month, Konan said, gaining a surprised look from her son. Now the training we'll be giving you is finishing your elemental manipulation, harder chakra control exercises, more physical exercises. And as for sparring, I know we usually have you go against a clone and occasionally with us, but it's time we step things up, she said, and motioned for Yahiko to finish explaining the regime they had thought up. You will be sparring full time against us, he said, making Naruto's jaw drop. He had a hard enough time against his clones and they were barely high genin level, so how the hell would he be able to go against a Jonin? And two at that? You San? He asked nervously. How am I going to be able to hold my own against the two if you? Yahiko merely gave a sadistic grin, which had Naruto looking worried. This is what upping your training is for, he said, because by the end of this month you will be high Chunin to low Jonin in skill, more than enough to beat most of the field agents that Hanzo throws at us, and if you can't beat them then you will be able to at least hold your own until backup arrives. Yahiko explained, getting a nod from his wife and an even more worried look from Naruto. Naruto sighed as he nodded. Training is going to be hell, isn't it? He asked in a dejected voice. Yahiko and Konan just nodded. Trust me, Sochi, you're going to hate us after we're done, Konan said, making him sigh again, but he was thinking, why me? And crying waterfall tears in his mind. Alright then, Yahiko said, bringing his son from his thoughts. Now, make as many clones as you can and then we'll begin, he said, getting that grin back, and it was quickly mirrored by Conan. Now Naruto was really starting to regret his decision to become a ninja, but did as he was instructed, and created well over 1,000 clones. 1 month later, when they said training was going to be hell, it was the understatement of the century. It was absolute torture. Over the month they had Naruto do everything that they said they would. The chakra control included senbon balancing, which was balancing his fingers on the tips while they were on the ground, and he was supporting his body with them, and trying not to puncture his limbs. Shuriken spinning, it involved rotating his chakra in various directions to spin a shuriken in any direction and speed. If he got it wrong, then it would go flying off in a random direction. He lost several clones a day doing that, and several others, and then he had to do them in any random order while he was tree climbing and water walking. The elemental manipulation was easily one of the easiest things he had to do, but even then they didn't make it any easier. They kept him at it until he could cut, burn, and crinkle a leaf with a single thought, and while he was working on his chakra control at the same time, and it was the same with the second step of each nature. The physical training was the worst that they put him through. After having him create as many clones he could the first day, they had given him gravity seals that were twice the normal weight of gravity, and then had him spar with them. It had taken some getting used to the seals he had on, and by the time he went to bed the first night he was bruised and battered beyond all recognition, and he could swear that several of his bones were broken. All he could do at the end of every day was drag himself into bed so that he could rest and let Helena's chakra do its magic. Speaking of Helena, they had been meeting every night since their initial meeting. They had talked about all the things that they liked and disliked, what their dreams were, what their lives were like before they met each other. Helena mostly on this part, and several other things. She had even started training him in several other jutsu that his parents didn't know, have, or were of her own creation, and had even let him sign the fox summoning contract. Helena could safely say that even though she had just met Naruto a month ago, and even if he was only 7, that she had fallen hard for him, his fun and playful attitude, willingness to protect everyone that was precious to him, and his carefree mind that when in battle turned into an utter serious and strategic one are a few of the things that caused her to do so. Now if only she could find it in herself to confess. Naruto meanwhile could say that she was very precious to him, and his best friend. But he was confused as well, because whenever he went to see her his heart would leap for joy and feel like it would burst from his chest. And whenever he had to leave his mindscape his heart would feel as if it was breaking. The reason he was confused was that he didn't feel like this for anyone else. Yes, he loved his parents dearly, but he couldn't place just what he felt his heart doing for Helena. He had also changed the mindscape, something that Helena didn't think was possible, from a sewer to a wide open meadow with a forest surrounding it and a pond in the middle. And just so she wouldn't get lonely when he wasn't there, he had made several fox kits to keep her company. So all in all, he was at the levels his parents wanted him to be at when they started his month of torture, and he would start helping in the war tomorrow. As Naruto opened his eyes, he saw that Yahiko was standing over him with a bright smile. "Good morning, Naruto," he said happily. "You ready to start work?" he asked, causing Naruto's eyes to widen as he remembered what this day was, and he nodded eagerly. "You bet to-san," Naruto said in an excited voice and jumped out of bed. "Alright then, as soon as we finish breakfast we can get started," Yahiko said as he walked out of the room, leaving Naruto to take a shower. After finishing cleaning and dressing himself, Naruto walked down to the kitchen to find that both his parents were sitting at the table waiting for him, Conan looking worried, and Yahiko had a scroll that had the seal of the Rebels of Rain in front of him. As he sat down, he asked, "So what's the first mission going to be?" His question caused Conan to flinch. She still wasn't too sure about him going to war so young, and Yahiko to grimace because he had just gotten a message from his second-in-command about what they had missed during the month, and what needed to be done. There were several missions of importance, though the mission that had become the most important was that there was information that Hanzo would be meeting with an informant from a different village tomorrow, and he wasn't so sure Naruto could handle it even if they would be going with him. "Well," Yahiko said, trying to think on just how to put his thoughts into words, "there is a meeting that Hanzo will be going to tomorrow. This is our chance to end this war, so he will be going in to assassinate both him and his informant," he said, causing Naruto to freeze as he went to pick up some of the toast that was in front of him, and Conan to look at him wide-eyed. "What?" they said at the same time. Yahiko sighed and looked at his family with a serious look. "Conan-chan, Naruto." I and many others believe that this war of Hanzo's has gone on for far too long and that it's time to bring it to an end. This is our chance to bring about a time of relative peace to the Rain Village," he said, and then his expression turned into a more gentle one. "I know that this isn't what you expected for your first mission, Naruto, but it's time for this war to end, and I promise you that when everything settles down that I will give you more training to make up for that." He turned to his wife, Konan-chan. "This is what Nagato died for. He wanted to bring peace to the world and made us promise that we would stop at nothing to do all that we can to make that dream a reality. And now's our chance to get a real start on that promise," he said with a determined look. His speech made the both of them think about what had been going on. During the last 3 years, Konan and Yahiko had been needed on missions periodically, and it was difficult enough to go through that without a child. But now that they had won, the war was really starting to affect their nerves, as they were worried about not making it home to see their loved ones. Naruto, on the other hand, was surprised to find that he himself was somewhat eager to end the war. While he was excited to finally see what a ninja's life was like, he was also tired of having to worry whether or not he'd be able to see his parents again. Both mother and son turned their heads towards one another, and they saw the same thing in each other's eyes, the resolve and determination to end this war. And they both nodded in agreement before turning back to Yahiko, who was looking at them with the same determined expression on his face. "Let's do it," all three said at the same time with a fire burning in their eyes. If one had been looking in on the conversation, they would have gotten the message that one way or another, be it by heaven or hell, this war would end tomorrow. The next day, "Okay, here's the plan," Konan said to the group that she was leading. Said group included Naruto and 3 rebel Jonin that they had picked up from the headquarters. "We will be waiting about 5 meters south of Hanzo and his informant's position. While Yahiko and his group give the signal to start the ambush, we will take out the informant, while Yahiko's group takes out Hanzo. Should things start to go sour, we will retreat and then regroup back at HQ. Any questions?" she finished as she was leading the group to their designated spot, to await the signal. A Jonin raised his hand and got a nod to go ahead with his question. "It's not so much about the plan itself, but are you sure that a child is ready to handle a mission of this importance?" he asked, only to shrink back due to the glare that was being sent his way by Konan. "Are you saying that my son is not ready for this?" she asked, causing the man to shake his head. "Good," she said as she turned to rest of the group. "Now if anyone else has any worries that my son is not ready, then I assure you that he is. Yahiko and I have trained him to the best of our abilities," she said as Naruto looked up to her, thankful that she was defending him and not knowing that Yahiko was doing the same in his group. "Now we wait," Konan said as she and the rest of the group looked into the clearing that Hanzo was supposed to be in. With Yahiko and his group were standing on the cliff overlooking the place where the meeting was to be held. "Alright, when we see Hanzo and his informant we'll begin," he said, getting nods from everyone in the group. And so they waited for an hour before Hanzo showed up with 2 bodyguards. But something seemed odd. All Hanzo was doing was standing still and talking to his guards, before he nodded and they jumped off in different directions. Yahiko's eyes widened as he saw this. "Oh no," he thought, standing from his couching position and turning to where his men had been. Only to see them all lying on the ground, each with their throat cut, and one of the guards he saw appeared next to him holding a kunai to his neck. "We walked right into an ambush," he thought, before his eyes widened as an alarming thought came to him. "Naruto, Konan," he thought in alarm before the one holding the kunai spoke with a chuckle. "I wouldn't worry about your wife and the kid in the other group, as they were who Hanzo-sama wanted us to bring to him," the guard said. This did nothing to bring Yahiko any relief, because he only glared at his captor. "If any one of you hurt them, you will pay," Yahiko said as threateningly as he could, causing the guard to laugh. "And what exactly are you going to do about it?" he sneered, as he looked down the cliff, seeing his comrade now holding a bound and struggling Naruto over his shoulder, while a clone was holding a bound, gagged and struggling Konan. Due to the blush on the clone's face, he had a pretty good idea as to what the gag was for. "Now why don't we join your little family down there, the guard said as he tightened his hold on the rebel and body flickered to the group below. With Konan and Naruto. When the guard's Hanzo had jumped away, everyone in the group was alarmed, and one had started to voice his concern before it was silenced. When Konan and Naruto had turned to look at what had happened, they had seen every one of the men in the group was dead, their throats slit. And then they both jumped aside as a guard would have appeared between them. But they had been caught by surprise when he had clones waiting for them, and both had been bound. Conan had to be gagged because she kept spouting curses that would make a sailor blush, and then they had been carried by the man and one of his clones, to where Hanzo was standing, though they didn't make it easy on him because they were both struggling. They just hoped that the same hadn't happened to Yahiko's group and that he had gotten away. Their fears were confirmed when just as Naruto was untied and thrown down into a ravine that was nearby. The other guard popped into the area with Yahiko and threw him down into the pit with Naruto. Conan meanwhile was still tied up and had been taken to Hanzo's side and was ungagged. Hanzo all the while was looking amused at who his guards had caught. "So these are the leaders of the group called Akatsuki who have been giving me trouble the last 8 years then?" he asked rhetorically in an amused voice. Then his face twisted into a serious expression, and he took out a kunai, and pointed it to Yahiko. "You, Yahiko Harakin, as the leader of Akatsuki, you will die here today," he said, causing all 3 of the captives to widen their eyes as he turned to Naruto, and his eyes took on an evil gleam. "You boy," he said, drawing his attention, "you kill him," he said, making everyone's expression become horrified. Naruto killing at this age was to be expected. But killing his father, one of the ones to take him in after he and Conan found him, was not. "If you do, I'll let your mother and yourself go free, but if you don't, your mother will die," Hanzo said, placing the kunai to Conan's neck. Then he pulled out another kunai and threw it into the ravine. It landed in front of Naruto. "Use that to kill him," he said, and even though he had a face mask on, "I don't know what to call that thing." You could feel the sick smirk he had on his face. Naruto was frozen to the ground. He couldn't move, he couldn't think, and he couldn't breathe. The thought of having to kill his father, even if he wasn't blood, was just too much for his young mind to bear. Conan couldn't keep quiet any longer, seeing the one that she and Yahiko had adopted being in so much emotional turmoil. "Don't, Naruto. Don't worry about me. You and Yahiko get out of here," she shouted. Yahiko, however, was thinking about how this day had gone from an assignation mission to a trap, and how it had affected his son. He turned to see that Naruto was wide-eyed and frozen to the spot he was standing on. He sighed as he stilled his nerves and decided at what had to be done. "Naruto," he said, making him flinch and shakily turned to him. "Kill me," Yahiko said, causing him gain a shocked expression. All he could do was stand there. "Naruto," Yahiko shouted, trying to get his son into gear. "Please, don't do it," Conan shouted, starting to cry as she saw the ones she loved in this situation. "You'd better hurry up or your mother dies," Hanzo said, getting tired of all the drama that was taking place in front of him. Hanzo saying this got Naruto into motion, and he slowly walked over to the kunai and picked it up. He turned to Yahiko, pointed it at him, and couldn't move. All he could do was stare at the man who had become his father. Yahiko, seeing that Naruto was struggling with his decision, rushed to him and stabbed himself with the kunai. Everything froze. All that could be heard was the splatter of blood as the kunai pierced Yahiko's heart. It was all that Naruto could do to not black out as his father slowly brought his hands up to wrap his son in a last hug. "Please, Naruto, you and Conan, you've gotta stay alive somehow," he gasped out through the pain, blood coming from his mouth. "Just do me a favor and look after your mother." And that was the last thing he said before he fell to the ground. "Yahiko," Conan shouted as tears poured from her eyes at seeing what her husband had done. Naruto just stood there looking at his now blood-covered hands, trying to comprehend what had just happened. His mother's shout brought him back to reality. He looked up to the now grinning like mad Hanzo. "There, I've done what you've asked, now please, let her go." He shouted the last part, as his eyes began to sting. Inside the mindscape, "What's happening?" Helena shouted as saw that her host's eyes were beginning to change. They had began to lighten from the azure blue they once were and had started to change to a light purple and gaining 4 rings around the now dot-like pupil before changing back to their normal azure blue. Her eyes widened as she recognized those eyes. Those eyes, they may not be complete, but they're the sage's eyes, she thought in awe. In all her years she never would have thought that she would see them again. Outside the mindscape, Hanzo merely looked at the now pain-filled boy, before he burst out laughing and drawing Naruto's attention. "Foolish boy, did you really think that I would let you and your mother go?" he asked in between his laughs, causing both of their heads to turn to the now insanely laughing man. He then lifted the kunai he had against Conan's neck above their heads and brought it down. There was the sound of cutting flesh, blood flashed, and then everything was quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. Naruto stared with wide eyes as his mother's body dropped into the ravine and landed next to him and his father's core. He couldn't believe it, he had just lost both of his parents. Parents he hardly knew but had become very attached to and loved like they were his real ones. He snapped, all the years of torture, abuse, starvation, neglect, and hatred came coming out in one strong pulse of chakra that swept through all the elemental nations and was felt in another world. Konoha, the third Hokage. Hiruzen Sarutobi sat straight up from his chair as he felt a strong pulse of chakra that almost shattered his windows coming from the direction of the land of rain. It was strong but at the same time familiar. His eyes widened as he remembered the last time he felt that particular chakra signature, Naruto. He's alive. He thought, almost leaping for joy, and a moment later his door was busted down by 5 people. A one-eyed cycloptic Jonin, a white-haired super pervert that wrote books, a red-eyed, black-haired genjutsu mistress, a blonde-haired and big-busted woman that had a diamond shape on her forehead, and said big-busted women's apprentice who was holding a pig. They were Kakashi Hitaki, Jiraiya of the Toads, Kurenai Yuhi, Tsunade Senju, and Shizune Kota, and Taunton the pig. They just stared at the aged cage for what seemed to be an eternity, before 4 out of the 5 started speaking at once. It was only thanks to his years of being a shinobi that he was able to catch it all. Hokage-sama, did you feel that? Kakashi asked hopefully. Sensei, that was Naruto's chakra signature, please let me go after him. Jiraiya demanded. Hokage-sama, if that was Naruto, please let me go get him. I owe it to Kushina-sensei. Kurenai all but pleaded. If you don't let me go after my godson Sarutobi, then I'll give you a beating that even I won't be able to heal you from. Tsunade threatened, making him sweat a bit. Oink oink, Taunton said, but had a mad look on her face. The other world. Hades, the god of death, was sitting quietly at his throne in the underworld, contemplating how he could possibly get back into a world that had been sealed off since his last visit. It was also a world where the people that were descendants of one of the most powerful men who had been blessed with all the gods' power were able to freely control the body's energies, and bend the elements to their will. He liked to spend a lot of time there due to not being able to go back to Olympus. And it was consequently in this same world that he had met his second wife, Kushina Uzumaki, and had sired a son. A son that both he and Kushina had been forced to leave behind, when the Kyuubi had broken loose from her and ravaged the village of Konoha. Now I bet you're all wondering how it was possible that Hades was Naruto's real father. It was simple when you thought about it. He had merely changed into a child version of his human persona and chosen to grow up in the Leaf Village. The name of his human persona, you ask? Well, it was Minato Namikaze, the 4th Hokage, the Yellow Flash and hero of Konoha. He bolted straight up as he felt a strong pulse of a type of energy that he had not felt in 7 years. That was chakra. Then that means that the seal over the 2 realms is weakening, but that chakra had a feel of mind to it. His eyes widened in realization as to what this could mean. It couldn't be Naruto. Could it? He thought as he started to fade from this realm, into the one he had been trying to get back into for the last several years to finally claim his son. Back with Naruto. When the dust steeled, all that could be seen was a crater. The pulse that had been let loose had been so strong that it had not only destroyed the ravine that they were in but had also expanded it by several times. And in this crater were the bodies of Yahiko and Konan Harakan. Standing several feet away, hunched over and clutching his head in pain, was Naruto Uzumaki Harakan. A good distance away by the edge of the crater was Hanzo, and behind him was an army of rain ninja. They were all surprised at what had happened when Naruto had let out that huge chakra wave, but nonetheless they were smirking, thinking that he had to be exhausted after letting out that amount of chakra. Hanzo had the largest smirk out of all of them. He raised his hand, "Kill him," he ordered, and all of his troops let loose volley after volley of kunai at the young boy, and Naruto did nothing except stand there still clutching his head. That is until they got within 2 feet of him, and raised his hand up and the kunai impacted an invisible barrier, and went flying back, several feet. The rain shinobi could do nothing but stare in shock. He deflected them. One said amazed, "How?" Another asked in shock. Naruto slowly raised his head to reveal his eyes. However, his eyes were no longer blue, they had changed to purple, and had 4 rings around the pupil. They held a very high level of anger, and he was letting out an insane amount of killing intent. When the shinobi saw this, they could only stare in shock. "The Rinnegan, it is real." One said, now sounding scared shitless, but how I thought it was just a myth. Another one said in the same amount of fear. Hanzo though showed no fear at all, just interest, those eyes, he thought. Naruto however wasn't bothering to listen to what his enemies had to say about his eyes, he was listening to the one that made his heart go wild. Let me out, Naruto. They will pay for hurting the one I love. Helena shouted angry to know that she had just confessed. When Naruto heard her demanding to get out, all he could do was start to chuckle, and then it changed into full-blown out laughter which quickly started to unnerve the shinobi. As he laughed he began to go through hand seals, and bit his thumb drawing blood. Summoning jutsu, he shouted as he slammed his hand down onto the ground. There was a loud poof sound and a hell of a lot of smoke. When it cleared it showed a sight that would have many grown men cowering and calling for their mommy. Because towering over them was a 900-foot tall and very pissed off Kyuubi no Kitsune in all her glory, with her 9 tails thrashing behind her to show just how angry she was. Laying on her head however was an extremely exhausted Naruto. The instant that Kyuubi could see that she was indeed let out of the seal, she sent a tail towards the now cowering army, Hanzo included, and whipped half of them out. Then she raised her head up, opened her mouth and began to release a huge amount of yuki. Dark red and blue orbs started to combine just in front of her mouth. When it was done there was a ball of compressed yuki that she ate. When she did there was a burst of smoke from her mouth and everything from the back of her neck to her head puffed up. She took a deep breath and opened her mouth, letting loose a powerful beam of chakra. Said beam took out the rest of the troops that had started to run when they saw what she had unleashed, leaving behind an even larger crater that had a deep gouge through it. When her work was done she sighed softly and lowered her head down and let Naruto slid off of it before she puffed back into the seal. I just hope that he can recover from this, she thought sadly as she did so. When she had gone back into the seal, Naruto had dragged himself over to the bodies of his parents. When he got there he let his defenses completely fall for the first time in his life and cried, letting out all the pain he had ever suffered in his life out. All the while he clutched the bodies of his parents as if they were a lifeline, until he passed out from both mental and chakra exhaustion. The last thing that could be heard from him was, "Do-san. Ka-san, I'm sorry I couldn't protect you." 5 minutes before with Hades, Minato. What the hell is going on? Hades thought as he looked down upon the scene below him. What he saw made him almost reveal himself as he watched his son just let the kunai bear down on him, and he would have if Naruto had not raised his hand and deflected them, causing his eyes to widen. That was gravity jutsu, he thought in surprise. He was even more surprised when Naruto started to laugh almost like he was insane. He sounds like he snapped, and why the hell is he in the rain village? He's supposed to be in Konoha, he thought, trying to figure out why he was on the border of the rain village surrounded by hundreds of enemy shinobi when he should be in the safety of the village of his birth. When Naruto bit his thumb and started going through some familiar hand signs, he was even more surprised. He knows how to summon at this age. I wonder if Jiraiya sensei gave him the toad contract, he thought, now starting to feel somewhat proud at his son. When he summoned not Gamabunta like he expected, but the Kyuubi, he almost had a heart attack. If it was even possible for a god to have one, what the hell? He wasn't supposed to meet her until he was 12. The only reason that I had set up for him to meet her this early was, oh, nope, his eyes widened in worry, because the only way that Helena could have woken up this early was if he had been seriously mistreated. Hades might not look like it, but he loved his children past and present dearly. He would have taken Naruto to his realm had the other gods not seen fit to seal it so that certain other beings couldn't get through it and find a new and possibly stronger power to wage war against them. Shaking his head to clear his thoughts, he saw that Kyuubi was now charging a tailed beast bomb, and he started to sweat. That technique was the only one that could seriously injure a god. If it was unleashed on mortals, well, you get the idea. As he shielded himself from the shockwave, he couldn't keep from thinking that Helena was extremely pissed off. Yes, she had used that during her attack on Konoha, but it was much weaker than this, so something must have caused her to become this angry. When the dust died down, he stared in shock at the damage. He had only ever saw this much damage once, and that was when the Sage of Six Paths had fought the Jubi or 10 Tails. When he looked to see the Kyuubi putting Naruto down, all he could think was, remind me to never piss off a woman, be it a goddess, tailed beast, or mortal even. Hey, he may be a god, but that didn't mean that he was immune from righteous feminine fury. The things that Persephone had done to him when he had brought Kushina into the palace in the underworld and said that she would be his second queen still gave him nightmares. When he saw Naruto crawl over to two bodies that he had failed to notice on his arrival, he was confused. What's their connection to him? He wondered, until he saw him burst into tears, clutching them for dear life and muttering, "Ka-san. Tu-san." He gained a sad look. They must have adopted him. Judging from his reaction, they were the closest he had to real parents, and to have just lost them must be hard. He thought sadly as he watched on. When he collapsed, Hades sighed as hovered down to his son. He crouched down and placed his palm against Naruto's forehead, and when he did he almost exploded into anger. The village that he had sacrificed so much for had done all that to his son. The only reason that he was holding back going to the hidden leaf and wiping it off the face of the earth was because of the few people who actually cared for Naruto, like his students, the old man, and the Ichiraku family. Though he was going to give the council a piece of his mind for threatening his son's life if the Sannin didn't stay away from him. He sighed as he snapped his fingers, and he, Naruto, Konan and Yahiko disappeared into his home realm. In the underworld, when he got back he immediately snapped his fingers again and the two bodies jerked to life, as their souls came back into them. "Where am I?" Yahiko said as he sat up and rubbed his head, before he looked around, to see that he was in a throne room that had a chair made of skulls, and two smaller ones on either side. Konan, who had been looking around, had frozen when she heard Yahiko's voice. "Why, Yahiko-kun?" she said as she turned towards him. Her eyes widened when she him and burst into tears as she hopped up and grabbed him in a hug that cracked some ribs. As she cried and was simultaneously strangling him, she was shouting at him, "Don't you ever do that kind of thing again. Do you understand me?" she said as buried her head deeper into his chest and squeezing him tighter. "Konan-chan, I can't be breath." Yahiko wheezed out, his face slowly turning blue. When she heard this she immediately let go, but still looked like she was going to cry at any moment. "Please, why did you do that? Why didn't you take Naru-chan and run?" she asked, trying to stave off the tears that were threatening to leak from her eyes. Sighing at how his wife was acting, he slowly wrapped her in a hug, "Because if I hadn't, Hanzo would have killed us all. I did what I had to do to make sure that you and Naruto survived," he said before he realized something. "Speaking of which, if I'm dead, why are you here?" he asked, puzzled. His answer was his wife huffing and holding him tighter, "Because that bastard Hanzo went back on his word, and killed me as soon as Sochi told him to release me." Her expression turned to a worried one as she started to sob again. "Oh no, Naruto. He's all alone again. What's he going to do without us? I don't want him to go back to the way he was before we found him," she said almost hysterically, fearing for the worst. Hades, who had been watching all this in amusement, cleared his throat at this point, drawing him the attention of the now concerned parents. When they looked over to see who had cleared their throat, they saw a tall and pale man, who had jet black shoulder-length hair, dressed in all black silk robes, and was looking at them with an amused expression while cradling their adopted son in his arms. Their eyes widened when they saw Naruto in the same place them and feared for the worst. Hades, seeing their expression, raised his free hand and put the fears at ease. "You may not recognize me, but you know me as the Shinigami, or the god of death, and to answer your question, no, he is not dead like the two of you. I just brought him here so someone could see her son," he said, snapping his fingers, and a skeleton servant came to him and bowed. "Could you get Kushina? Tell her it's important," he said. The skeleton nodded and left in a hurry. Hades turned back to the two now scared rebels, saw their looks and sighed, and again snapped his fingers. He was surrounded in a bright light that almost blinded them and made them look away. When they looked back, their eyes widened in shock, because standing in front of them was Minato Namikaze, dressed in the standard Konoha Jonin uniform under his Hokage robe. Imagine how he looks in anime. And still holding Naruto, who, now that they thought about it, looked a lot like Minato. How, was all that escaped Yahiko's mouth. Konan was too shocked to say anything. Minato chuckled as he walked over to his throne and sat down, and setting Naruto down so that his head rested on his chest. "Yes, I am Minato Namikaze, the yellow flash of Konoha. I am also the death god Shinigami, but I prefer the name Hades when I'm in my god form," he said, causing them to just stare at him with WTF expressions. Their attention was averted when the door of the throne room opened and in walked a beautiful red-headed woman. She had a kind round face, jade green eyes, and hair that stopped mid-back. Right now though that she had a confused look on her face, and it changed from confused to shock as she saw Hades in his human form, and she had to restrain herself from running up to him. It had been years since she had seen that face. As she walked up to him, she also took notice of the two other people in the room, and she became even more confused than she was before. Her eyes, however, were drawn to the one that she now noticed was in her husband's arms, and she began to shake as she stopped just in front of the throne. "Is that Naruto?" she asked with a stutter as she gazed upon his sleeping form. Minato just smiled softly and nodded. "Yes, Kushina-chan, this is our son," he said in a soft voice, happy that he could see the three of them together once again. Kushina almost knocked him off his throne when she swooped in and took Naruto out of his arms and took a long look at his face, before she squealed and hugged him to her chest, making Conan's eye twitch, at seeing how Naruto's apparent real mother handled seeing him for the first time since his birth. It was a wonder how he didn't wake up from how hard she was squeezing him, and how loud she had squealed. When she had settled down, she began to realize what the implications of how he was here meant, and her eyes showed just how worried she was when she turned to Minato. "Please, Minato-kun. Please don't tell me that he's—" She trailed off, letting what she was going to say hang, and Minato shook his head, answering her unfinished question. Kushina sighed in relief that her son wasn't dead, but then raised a brow as she saw the other two people in the room, and the one with blue hair, whose eyebrow was twitching madly. Turning to him, she asked, "Why are they here?" she asked, pointing over her shoulder to Yahiko and Conan, causing them to sweat drop. Judging by the attitude and her personality, she is defiantly Naruto's birth mother. They thought at the same time, and Helena, who was watching through the seal, giggled at her former host's attitude. "Yep, that's defiantly Kushi-chan," she thought, with a fond smile. Minato's sweat dropped at his wife's cluelessness. "They Kushi-chan are the ones who have been raising Naruto for the last 3 years," he said, and Kushina's eyes widened before she turned to them and bowed deeply. "Thank you for taking care of Naruto for me. I would have done it myself, but well, yeah," she said respectfully at first and then sheepishly, causing them to once again sweat drop. "Yep, defiantly Naruto's mother," they thought. Minato chuckled before he turned serious. "Kushina-chan, while meeting Naruto's adopted parents and letting you have a chance to see him again was part of the reason I called you here. It wasn't the full reason," he said, making Kushina nod. "Alright, tell me how hard his life was before you adopted him," she asked somberly to Conan, who was now holding Naruto in her arms. The two adopted parents sighed, took one look at each other and nodded. "It was, well, to put it simply, it was hell," Conan said, causing Kushina's face to take a shocked look. She turned to Minato, who nodded grimly to confirm what she said. "It's true," he said softly. "I have viewed his memories, and if you want I can show them to you," he said, making her nod as she stepped up to him. "Please, show me, Minato-kun, I want to know what my baby boy has gone through," she said, making Minato sigh but nod. He placed one hand on her head and another on Naruto's and channeled the memories to her. As soon as he took his hands away from their heads, she burst into tears and grasped Minato in a death hug. "They did that to him. They turned my son's childhood to hell. I will kill the ones who did this to him," she said angrily through her tears. Minato just rubbed her back soothingly. "Actually, I have a better idea," he said, making everyone present look at him confused. "How about we let everyone in the elemental countries know just what Konoha has done, and let Konoha know what they missed out on," he said, getting a very evil grin, a grin that everyone picked up on and quickly mirrored. Konoha. Several hours later, Sarutobi and the others were in a council meeting about the chakra pulse they had felt earlier. When they learned who that pulse was from, the ninja side had been extremely happy, and there were several volunteers to go and bring Naruto back. The civilian side, though, had immediately started shouting that they should send out people to kill the demon. Sarutobi was about to shout for order when something strange happened. The light began bending around the center of the room, and an orb formed, and inside that orb showed 5 people, 2 that no one but Jiraiya recognized. The other 3 were very recognizable to everyone in the room, and the 4 adults looked downright pissed. There were several gasps of "Hokage-sama" from the ninja and civilian sides, ones of "Sensei" from Kakashi and Kurenai, and just plain looks of shock for the third and his students. The ones that were inside the orb were Minato Namikaze, Kushina Uzumaki, Yahiko and Conan Harakin, and Naruto Uzumaki Harakin, who was being held by Conan. There were many gasps from all over the council room, while Hiruzen, Jiraiya, and Tsunade's eyes were drawn to the one that the blue-haired woman was holding. Naruto, they thought. seeing how much he had grown and now looked so much like Minato. Said Cage stepped forward so that he was the center of attention and was glaring at everyone, mostly the civilians in the room. "Greetings, Konoha," he said in a voice that was laced in anger that made every one of the ninja to flinch. "If you are wondering how I'm alive, trust me, I am not, and neither is my wife," he said, stepping aside to show Kushina, who was glaring at everyone regardless if they were ninja or not. When people heard this, they were shocked. The fourth was married, and he was apparently contacting them from the dead. "Now as to why and how I have contacted you," he said as he stepped back into view. "It is to inform you and everyone in the village about how disappointed I am in you," he said, getting confused looks from the civilians, and grimaces for the ninja. "Not only did you see fit to disregard my wish that Naruto Uzumaki was to be seen as a hero for becoming the container of the Kyuubi, but you neglected, starved, and beat him, only allowing him to have the most rotten food from your stores at insanely high prices," he said, now glaring at the smug-looking civilians. Before he continued, "You see, I had sealed a portion of mine and my wife's chakra into the seal that kept Kyuubi at bay, a seal that was close to breaking recently," he said as he looked down at everyone who now had horrified looks on their faces. "I'm sure you all felt that shockwave," he asked rhetorically. "The reason that I sealed them in was as a fail-safe in case it ever did get close to breaking," he continued. "The seal is now in no danger of breaking." He stopped here to let the information sink in, "and it is through this chakra that me and Kushina are speaking to you now, so let me tell you all a little story," he said. "There was once this boy, who fell in love with a girl," he started. "This girl was no ordinary girl, as she held a dark secret within her." He continued, getting wide eyes from the third, Jiraiya, Tsunade, Kakashi, Kurenai, and Shizune. They knew exactly what he was going to say. What this girl held was a demon, held inside her by a powerful seal, and only her closest people knew about it. When she went to tell this boy about what she held, she was scared that he was going to reject her and start calling her things like demon, demon bitch, or several other names that I will not say. The boy, however, did not reject her. In fact, his respect for her, which was already high, went up, and he embraced her. When asked why he didn't hate her, the boy said, "Why would I hate a beautiful girl as you? As I can see the difference between the scroll and the kunai that is sealed inside." He stopped and looked at Kushina, who was smiling in remembrance to his words. When the girl heard this, she immediately knew that this boy was the one that she would love for the rest of her life and long after. He said as now he was smiling in remembrance at how he and Kushina had fallen in love, before his expression turned back to serious, and he continued. The boy and girl grew up, and because they each had many enemies, they married in secret, and it wasn't long after that they found out that they would be having a child, and they couldn't be happier. He paused here, remembered the night that Naruto was born. But unfortunately it was not the last. As the night that she went into labor, the seal that held the demon at bay weakened enough that it broke free, and it attacked the closest thing it could see. That being the village they had grown up in. The boy, now a man, who had become the leader of the village, saw only one way to stop the beast. Could not ask another family to sacrifice their child if he was unable to do the same, and so it was despite his dying wife's pleas that he took his newborn son and sealed the beast into him, sacrificing his life to do so. He died that night holding both his wife and child, leaving behind a very simple wish. Minato paused when he heard a sniff from behind him and looked to see both Kushina and Konan wiping tears from their eyes, and sweat dropped. Turning back to the now captivated audience, he continued. That wish was for his son to be seen as a hero that would be loved and respected. But the people of the village, having little to no knowledge about the sealing arts and unable to tell the difference between a scroll and the kunai sealed within, spat upon their leader's final wish and saw fit to make the boy their personal punching bag. The man's predecessor, who had grown old, took up the mantle as the village's leader once again and tried his best to make sure that the boy could have a normal life. He did so by making a law to prevent anyone but the older generation from knowing what he held until the boy was ready to know about what he held, and who he trusted to know about it. Minato finished as he now turned to glare at every one of the civilians on the council, making them start to sweat. That boy and girl were me, Minato Namikaze, and my wife Kushina Uzumaki, he yelled at them, causing them to gasp. That son was Naruto Uzumaki. Our son, he yelled again, causing many more gasps to be heard throughout the room. He stepped back to allow Kushina the room's attention, and she did not look happy when they caught sight of her. All I have to say is that you are all very lucky that I am dead, because if I wasn't, I would be in that council room right now killing each and every one of you," she said, raising her fist threateningly and causing many to faint at the threat. She stepped back to allow Minato to speak again. "We have viewed our son's memories and we are absolutely disgusted by how you and everyone in the village has treated him. The only good thing that happened was him being taken out of the village and meeting the ones behind me, whose names are Yahiko and Konan Harakan, who have adopted him and had been up until now training him in the ninja arts, and let me tell you all, you have lost a prodigy in the making, he could even surpass me one day," he said, causing many of the surrounding people, Kushina and the others included, to stare at him in shock. "If you are thinking that you can send somebody to convince him to come back to the Leaf, then you are sadly mistaken, as neither him nor his adopted mother will be anywhere near the elemental nations anytime soon. You'll notice I said only he and his mother, because Yahiko was recently killed on a mission to stop the war in the Rain Village and Naruto was on that mission. It was his first as a shinobi, and it was because of seeing the one that had become his father killed in front of him, that he lost control of the fox," he said, causing many more gasps to be heard. Many of the shinobi in the room knew that if Naruto had almost broken the seal, then that means that he had gone mad with grief and lost the will to live, and the seal that Minato used was powered by that will. Their eyes widened at what could have happened had Minato not sealed a portion of his chakra into the seal. "But if I were you, I would worry about how you're going to save face to the other villages, because by the time this message ends, every village on the continent will know what you have done to my family, your allies included, and they will most likely cut all ties to you," he said as he waved his hand, and several more orbs were made, and through them they could see every allied and enemy village. Their streets packed full of people, all looking up at the orb that was in their village square. If you're wondering what the other orbs are doing in the other villages, they are playing all of Naruto's memories, including how his own village treated him. They are also playing what is happening in this meeting as it happens," Minato said with a dangerous smirk on his face that caused many of the council members to gasp and want to have a heart attack at what the repercussions of their actions have led them to. However, to the ones that have treated him right and actually followed my wishes, those being Kakashi Hitaki, Kurenai Yuhi, Hiruzen Sarutobi, Jiraiya and Tsunade of the Sannin, Shizune Kota, Ayame and Tuchi Ichiraku. If you so wish to leave this god-forsaken village with your families, then you will be accepted by the villages of Suna, Kiri, and the village in Wave Country. Maybe you can set up a ninja village there," he suggested with a thoughtful look at the prospect of a new village. When he looked back, he gained a mischievous grin. "And just to let you all know, this is being played not only in the council chambers but also in the village square, so everyone knows what secrets have been kept from them, be it for their own good or for foolish reasons," he said, sending another look at the civilians. What would have it they were still in their seats, but they were all lying on the floor either due to heart attacks or fainting from shock. He didn't know and didn't particularly care. "We will be taking our leave now, as I have nothing more to say to a village full of trash, so goodbye Konoha. I hope you're all happy with how your life turns out from now on, because you fucked up." And with that, all the orbs vanished, with a loud popping noise. And the moment that they disappeared, the village was in total and utter chaos. The Hokage just sighed and turned to his ninja. "Well, I do believe that we did as Minato-kun said. We fucked up, and we fucked up big time. The underworld at this point in time." As soon as the orbs had been turned off, everyone had taken one look at each other, burst into laughter, and were soon clutching their stomach. Konan not so much, as she was still holding onto Naruto, but she was still laughing. "Oh man, I haven't had this much fun since that time that we went on the mission to Kiri and ended up fighting a legion of sea monsters," Kushina said as she calmed down and wiped a tear from her eye. Minato just smiled and nodded as he remembered that mission. They had been sent to deliver a message to Kirigakure and had to water walk all the way there, but had stumbled on a nest of octopus eggs with the mothers of said eggs guarding them. Needless to say, they had ended up fighting them off. In the end they won and ended up taking home well over 200 pounds of octopi meat. They had feasted for days on the stuff after they got home. That was some good sushi. Konan, however, gained a puzzled look as she remembered something that Minato had said. Minato-sama?" she asked uncertainly. He turned his head to look at her, and nodded to signal her to speak. "What did you mean that neither me nor Naru-chan will be anywhere near the elemental nations? And why just the two of us? Can't Yahiko-kun come with us?" she asked as she grabbed both of the men in her life tightly. Minato sighed as he nodded. What I meant by that is in order to prevent anyone from finding you or Naruto, I'm going to be sending you to a different world that is connected to yours. He said, unfortunately I can only send one soul to be with Naruto, and I believe that he needs a mother's love more than that of fathers at the moment. He said sadly, causing Conan to look down. I would send him with you if I could, but I can't. He said, it's just how things work down here. He finished as she nodded understanding. Then could I view what happened after Hanzo killed me? I would like to see what happened to Sochi-kun, to make him like this. She said as she looked down onto the one in her arms, the one she had come to love as her own. He looked so exhausted and saddened, even in his sleep she could tell that it would take some time for him to recover. Minato sighed but nodded before he looked over to Kushina and Yahiko, asking them a silent question, and they nodded as they stepped up next to Conan. They were going to view the event as well. As he stepped up to the group of four he said, yes you can Conan-san, and we will all be viewing it with you, he said. However, we will be seeing it from Naruto's point of view. He said and placed his one hand on Naruto's head again and then held out the other. When you place your hands in mine, all of us will be able to see what happened. He explained and they nodded and they all placed one of their hands on his, and were pulled into Naruto's mind. An hour later. An hour passed as they viewed what happened after Conan had been stabbed, and when they came back to the plane of consciousness they were all quiet shocked. Minato not so much as he had seen it firsthand, but he was still surprised to have seen, felt, and heard what Naruto had nonetheless. When Conan and Yahiko had seen what had happened they were beyond shocked that he had been keeping the fact that he had met the Kyuubi and that she was female from them, and even more so when they saw him unlock a dujutsu that they had only ever seen Nagato have, the Rinnegan. And on top of that, he had summoned the Kyuubi or Helena they now knew to be her name to finish the job that the original mission had been given to them for, and that the Kyuubi happened to be in love with him. But when the shock had died down they felt an overwhelming feeling of pride. Pride at how strong he had become, and what he could possibly accomplish. Kushina though felt little to no shock at all, just pride, the need to tease, and anger. She had known all along that it was all possible for her son to unlock the Rinnegan at some point. It helped to know that your family were descendants of the Sage of Six Paths. And she was really planning on teasing Helena the next time she saw her for admitting to loving Naruto, something that Helena was just now realizing and was blushing up a storm. But overall she was angry for what Hanzo and his troops had done to Naruto, and if they weren't already dead she would go and kill them herself. Minato, although a little shocked, was confused. How on earth had his son gained the sage's eyes? The gods had only blessed one man with all their powers and those eyes signified such, so it left the ever-present question of how in his mind. His eyes widened in realization as he turned to look at his steaming wife. Was Kushina a descendant of the sage? It just didn't seem possible. Gah! All this thinking is making my head hurt. I'll ask later, but for now I have some things to give Naruto that will help him in his future adventures. He turned to the still shocked couple and cleared his throat to gain their attention. Now that we have seen them it's time for you to go. Minato said, before he produced 3 scrolls from a pocket inside his jacket. But before you do I want you to give these to him when he wakes up. Inside them are many of the jutsu I created during my time in the Shinobi world, and the ones that I have thought up since then. He said, and he turned to Kushina who nodded and produced 2 of her own scrolls. Please give these to Naru-chan when he wakes up. Inside are what's left of the Uzumaki fortune, and several of the jutsu of the Uzumaki clan. And many of my own as well. She said as her eyes started to tear, as this would be the last time that she would see her son in a long while. Minato again stepped up and put his hands to both Naruto's and Conan's foreheads. She felt a little unsteady when he removed them, and had a questioning look to her face. Seeing this, Minato chuckled and said, the place you're going doesn't speak elemental, and I have transferred a full knowledge and understanding of the language they speak to the both of you. He explained, stepping back to allow Yahiko to speak to his wife for the last time. Conan-chan, I will always love you like I have since the day we met. I just wish that we had more time together, so that we could have made all our dreams come true. I know that I can't really ask you to do this, but please live a good life and take care of Naruto. He said. Conan was on the verge of tears as she nodded, and I will always love you, Yahiko-kun. She said as both husband and wife started to cry. They shared one last kiss before Yahiko stepped back, to allow Minato to do what was needed to be done. As he stepped up and began a long sequence of hand signs, he, Kushina, and Yahiko smiled to them. two of them troughed tear-filled eyes. And the last knowing that he would be sending them to a better place. As he finished the last hand sign and black chakra began to spiral around him, he took a long look at his son and his adopted mother. Take care of each other, he said before he shouted, time-space style, dimensional transfer. And with that, mother and son vanished into a world that would be completely unknown to them. Where am I? It's so dark, Naruto thought as he stared at the blackness that surrounded him. The last thing he remembered was unleashing a tidal wave of chakra after Hanzo had killed Conan, and then, nothing. He thought that he could hear voices talking around him, a woman's sad and desperate voice calling out for him, a man's comforting voice, another's somewhat amused and gentle tone, and finally a sheepish and confused voice were what he could hear. He was able to catch snippets of what they were saying. Why did you do that? If I hadn't then, Naruto. He's all alone again. Yes, I am. Please tell me what my was all that he could really understand. There were several more things that they said, but that was just what he could get before they started to fade. Where am I? He thought again as he began to think of all the possibilities. He knew that he wasn't in the waking world anymore, because he was floating in the middle of wherever he was. And he couldn't possibly be sleeping because he would have ended up in his mindscape by now, and this felt nothing like it. His eyes widened in worry and fear. Is this hell? Is this the punishment I get for doing what I did? He asked himself. His eyes began to water when images of Yahiko standing in front of him with a kunai stabbed into his heart began to flash through his mind. I guess that I really do deserve to go to this place after what happened. He thought as he began to sob and wipe away stream of tears. It's all my fault. If I hadn't pushed Tu-san and Ka-san into training me harder, they'd still be alive. His thoughts continued to get darker and more depreciating as he sobbed. I guess what the villagers said was true. I really am a monster, a demon. Naruto thought. He would have continued this line of thought had a voice in his head not shouted over his thoughts. Naruto Uzumaki, don't you dare think such thoughts, it said, and he looked up, swiveling his head to see who had spoken. Who's there? He asked, scarred. The voice chuckled a bit before it spoke again. I am. Now what are you doing here? It asked. Naruto just shook his head. I don't know. One minute I'm watching Hanzo kill my mother and the next I'm here. Honestly, if this is hell, it's not what I expected it to be like. He thought back. The voice chuckled again. This time he noticed a female tinge to it. That's what many before you have believed. And no, this is not hell, nor are you dead. It said. By now, Naruto was starting to get annoyed at talking to nothing. Okay, where are you? Show yourself, he said out loud, his voice echoing in the emptiness of the black void he was in. The voice giggled again. Very well then, it said, and the space in front of him began to distort before a shapeless mass began to form, and then change into something else. It took the shape of a pale-skinned, silver-eyed girl who had jet black hair that was waving with no wind, almost like there was a breeze that couldn't be felt. Naruto was wide-eyed in surprise as this happened. Who or why you? He stuttered out as he took in what had just happened. The girl just giggled again. Oh, no one important, I'm just one of your father's messengers, she said, and his eyes went from showing surprise and now held confusion. You know who my father is? He asked. She nodded with a small smile. Could you please tell me who he is? Naruto asked as he looked at her almost pleadingly now. Seeing her lord's son having such a desperate face, the girl was thinking that he really must have had a hard life to be this anxious to know who the man in question was. I am sorry, Naruto, but I can't tell you who he is, she said, causing him to look down at the prospect of having another opportunity to know who his father was slipped through his fingers. And why can't you? He asked, confused as to why everyone he met that knew of the man refused to tell him anything about him. She sighed and explained, the reason is that he ordered me not to tell you, she said, causing him to look up. It's not that he doesn't want you to know, because trust me, he does. It's just that he wants you to be ready, meaning both mentally stable and physically strong enough to learn who he is, she said. After she had explained the reasons, Naruto was thinking, how am I not ready? I've been training my ass off for 3 years now, so how am I not? He thought, clenching his fists to stop them from shaking. But now we're on one of the topics of what I came to tell you, she said, making Naruto raise a brow. Your father sent me to tell you why we can't tell you right now. Why he left you in the Leaf Village instead of taking you with him. What happened after you passed out, and what will be happening from here, she explained, causing him to nod. And so she explained, How Naruto couldn't know of his father until he was ready was because he was a powerful god that was from a world that was connected to his. Why he left him in the Leaf Village was because of the fact that the other gods who he learned were 12 major ones in total, had decided to seal off the gate connecting the dimensions. And that had he had the chance he would have taken him from that world and taken him to a special camp that all the children of the gods eventually wind up in, where he would have grown up with people his age and not have been abused like he had been, and would have been trained to fight different types of creatures that hunt the children of the gods or demigods as was the official term. She explained about how when Naruto sent that pulse of chakra it had caused the seal over the realms to weaken enough for his father to feel it and see what had caused it, had come to the scene just after Conan had been killed, and watched everything. And that when he passed out he had viewed his memories, taken him Conan's and Yahiko's bodies to the underworld and restored life to them, but she said it in a way that he wouldn't be able to make the connection to his father. And how his father, his real mother and his adopted parents had threatened Konoha, and offered leniency to the ones that treated him right. She also explained that there were 3 gods that were the bosses, I guess you could call them at that, and how after a devastating war they had sworn to never have kids again. She said they had sworn on something called the River Styx, one of the most powerful binding rituals ever created. And that vow had only been broken once by the one he learned was called Zeus, god of the sky. And by breaking that vow his daughter who Naruto learned was named Talia was doomed to being hunted by the worst monsters there were. He also learned much to his dismay that she had only recently been turned into a tree when they were almost at the camp that would protect her, and her spirit now being bound to that very tree to guard the borders of the camp. And to his ultimate dismay that he was a child of one of the big 3 gods. Finally she got to the part where they were going to be sent to the other world to protect them, and that both his real parents had left scrolls for him. When she was done Naruto's eyes had swirls in them due to information overload. She giggled when she saw that and lightly shook his shoulder to snap him back to whatever reality they were in. When he had been shaken from his daze Naruto rubbed his sore head, and thought over everything he had learned the last few minutes. Okay then, he said. I guess I'll have to wait and get to this camp that he says would have raised me. He said making the girl nod, though she smirked some before saying, oh, and you won't be going right away. This drew a confused look from Naruto. Why? Because if what you say is right, then I should head there as soon as I can. He said, not understanding why he had to wait. Normally this would be true since because you're the child of one of the big 3 gods more than the average number of monsters would go after you. She started making Naruto nod, those being his reasons, as he didn't want him or his mother to suffer those attacks, but you should be able to handle yourselves for a few years, before your aurora starts attracting the bigger monsters. She said, making Naruto stop his nodding and have a deadpan look on his face. Besides there's another child of the big 3 that needs you to watch out for him until a satyr can guide you both to the camp. She finished, causing Naruto to gain a questioning look in his eyes. How is that possible? I thought that you said there was an oath that all 3 took that said not to have any more kids, and here you're telling me that it has now been broken all 3 times? He said, asked in a voice that made it clear that he was somewhat worried. Technically it's only been broken twice. She said sheepishly, now rubbing the back of her head. Hearing her say that Naruto raised a brow in question. The girl, who still hadn't given her name, sighed a bit. The Shinobi world wasn't included in the oath. She said, making Naruto again to look at her questionably. Seeing his unchanged look she again sighed and explained, there had never been a child sired by any of the big 3 in the world of ninja. So they didn't think that it would ever happen, and didn't include it into the vow. She explained, even though it wasn't, your father as soon as he found out your mother was pregnant began to look for ways to make sure that the other 2 didn't find out, and lo and behold when he found that they hadn't included your world he was so relieved that you wouldn't be put to death that he granted her mother the title of his second wife. She said, and seeing Naruto looking at her with a WTF look she giggled, trust me Naruto, he treats both of his wives like equals. And before you ask, yes, he is a polygamist, but he won't be taking any more wives, especially after what his first one did to him after he told her about Kushina. Though something that she said before clawed itself to the forefront of his mind. What did you mean that I have to look out for the big 3 child? He asked. The girl just shrugged. I really don't know, but I guess your father doesn't want his brother's kid to go through the same thing that Talia did. So I guess you can consider this your first real mission. She said with an impish grin at the last part as a strange light began to shine in Naruto's eyes and she knew she had pressed the right buttons. The instant that the word mission left the girl's mouth, Naruto had began running through all the possibilities to it, and couldn't get it out of his mind. He smirked before he replied, "Well, when you put it that way, then I guess that I could keep an eye on the guy." "So what's his name?" he asked, crossing his arms. The girl smirked. She had indeed pushed the right buttons. "His name is Percy Jackson, and he's about a year younger than you," she said, and then the area began to brighten around them. "I guess this is where I take my leave then, Naruto Uzumaki," she said, and her shape began to distort, becoming a shapeless mass again, and then fading into nothing, though before he was blinded by the light, he heard her voice, nothing more than a whisper, but still he heard it say, "We will meet again, Naruto, many more times in the future." And with that, Naruto jolted up from the bed he was laying on and immediately saw the concerned eyes of Conan. An hour beforehand, "Oh," was all that could be heard coming from Conan's mouth as she tumbled through the dimensional tunnel that Hades, Minato, had sent both her and Naruto through. Speaking of her son, he was still out of it and was being held tightly to her chest. When she looked up from the ball that she had unknowingly curled herself into to keep her and Naruto from being separated, she saw that the end of the tunnel was close, because she could see a light ahead. Thank God, she thought, unknowingly starting to change her language into that of this world. As soon as they were through the end of it, she saw that they were now free-falling stories above a giant city. Despite the situation, she couldn't help but be amazed. She had never saw buildings so big that they scraped the sky, and had never seen whatever those metal carriages were that people were getting in and out of. Snapping out of her trace, she aimed them for a building that was fast approaching, and in an impressive display of acrobatics she landed feet first but on the side of the building. As she started to walk down it, she remembered what Hades had said to her about normal people not being able to use chakra. "Remember, Conan-san, almost all the people where I'm sending you will not be able to use their body's chakra. So it is of great importance that you do not reveal anything of the likes to anyone that you meet," he had warned. She smirked to herself at the double meaning to the words. "Well then, if they can't use chakra, then they shouldn't be able to sense it either, meaning that I can use genjutsu to hide for now," she thought, and just barely shifting Naruto over so she could use her hand, Conan did a half-ram sign and muttered, "Genjutsu. Hiding in plain sight." With the illusion up, it was only a matter of walking down the side of the building. When she got down, she quickly looked around to get her bearings and sighed in relief when she spotted a hotel just on the other side of the street. Genjutsu still in place, she put some chakra to her feet and in one massive leap jumped over the street full of moving metal carriages. Getting a room was a simple matter of using another genjutsu on the man at the desk, and she easily got what she wanted. After getting into the room, she laid Naruto down on one of the twin beds and began looking him over. His condition overall was good. He just had a big case of chakra exhaustion, which for him wasn't a big deal, as having Helena sealed in him gave him monster reserves that replenished an absurd rate. The thing that worried her though was that it had been several hours since he had passed out, and even when he was exhausted after training he would be fit as he could be an hour or two after. She did a few hand signs and her hands lit up in green chakra. She sighed as she placed them over Naruto's head. She almost jumped back when she did, because what she found amazed her. Naruto's brain was full of activity. The reason she was surprised was that she knew when someone usually went through a traumatizing part in their life and they go into a coma, their mind usually slows down to process the event at a slower speed. Naruto's, however, had speed up almost like he was having a conversation with himself. It'll take some time for him to recover from that incident, she thought sadly. Then, hearing a rumble coming from Naruto's stomach, she sweat dropped. "I guess I better get some food ready for when he gets up." Now her stomach grumbled, causing her to almost face fault. "Myself as well, it seems," she thought, getting up and grabbing a sealing scroll from her hip pouch and unsealing the supplies to make dinner. It wouldn't be big, but it would be enough for now. Half-hour later, Conan sighed as she turned off the stove and sat the last plate of food on the table. Now all she had to do was wait. And she didn't have to wait long, as 2 minutes later Naruto jerked awake in bed and met her concerned gaze. Mom," he stuttered before he looked confused. He knew what he said but didn't understand why it didn't come out as "Ka-san." Conan, seeing his confused look, giggled a little when she realized what he was confused about. What's going on?" Naruto asked, looking around. "And where are we?" he asked. That was when he remembered what the messenger said about being in a new world and being able to speak the language of the people there, and a look of realization dawned on his face. "Something wrong?" Conan asked as she saw this, and was wondering why he had that look. Nothing, just remembering what the messenger said. Naruto said as he sighed, and tried to sit up but found he couldn't. Messenger? She asked as she helped him sit up. Hades hadn't said anything of a messenger? Nodding, Naruto explained what had happened. When I was unconscious I was in a, well, it looked like a void. While I was there I was going into self-pity and I was calling myself a monster. He said, looking away at this part as Conan glared at him for calling himself that. But when I started to call myself that, there was this voice in my head that told me to get it together and snap out of it. It turned out to be a messenger from my dad. He said, looking at Conan, she told me about what happened, after I passed out, that you and dad met my real parents, and that my real dad is a god and he took my mom for his second wife. He said, causing Conan to widen her eyes, that he knew all that. I know that you can't tell me who he is, but I'm at least glad he saw me once even if I couldn't have met both him and mom in return. He continued with a small grin. I also know that he left me some scrolls of both his and mom's jutsu and their personal letters as well. He said before his stomach growled and he blushed and turned his head away. Conan giggled again and just shook her head. Come on Sochi-kun, I made dinner. She said, her talking going back to elemental when she did, but then her look turned dark, and you had better explain the rest of what happened and what exactly you've been hiding from me for the last month. Hi Ka-san, Naruto said, snapping into a scared salute, his speech also reverting back to elemental. Later that night, while they had eaten, Naruto had explained everything of what happened in that void place, and what skills Helena, who was strangely quiet right now, had been teaching him. When Conan had heard exactly what Naruto and that mysterious girl had discussed and what he had been hiding from them over the month, she was understandably surprised. After that they moved on to Naruto's mission. Honestly Naruto, I can understand why he wouldn't want his brother to lose a child. But why does he want you to look after him? Conan asked, confused. I really don't know, but it's not like I can really refuse it. Naruto said, besides this Percy guy is family when you think about it, distant but still family. He continued, drawing a look of understanding from Conan. Okay, so what's the plan then? I mean, you can't just track him down. We don't even know the first thing of this world. She said, getting a nod from Naruto. I was hoping that my father, whoever he is, would have left a hint in one of those scrolls he left me. He explained, and maybe he did. They ate the rest of their food in silence. When they had finished, Conan looked at Naruto and sighed as she pulled out the scrolls that his parents left for him, and handed them over. Naruto nodded his thanks as he looked them over. They looked like regular scrolls, but two had the Uzumaki swirl on the side, and the others had a strange-looking helmet on their sides. He just shrugged the helmet off as he picked up one of the two Uzumaki scrolls. When he tried to open it, though, it wouldn't budge. He looked up to Conan for an explanation as to why it wouldn't open, just to see her holding back a giggle. Ha ha. Laugh it up Ka-san. He said, still trying to open it. Actually, Naru-chan, the way you're trying to open the scroll is wrong. Conan said as she tried not to laugh. Her statement drew a confused look from Naruto. What do you mean? He asked, confused. Conan sighed as she took out a scroll with a blood seal on it that she had packed before that mission, and began to explain. This Naruto, she said, pointing to the seal, is called a blood seal. It's used mostly by clans to make sure that their enemies can't get their techniques, so it can't be opened by just anybody. It has to be a family member. You open it by swiping some of your blood onto the seal. She explained and then showed him what to do by biting her thumb and wiping the blood on the seal. Naruto nodded and copied her actions. The next thing that happened was that the scroll fell open in his hands with 3 seals on it. Though what fell out of the blood seal was a note. Picking it up, Naruto read what was on it. Dear Naru-chan, I bet you're wondering who I am, aren't you? Well, my name is Kushina Uzumaki, the red-hot-blooded habanero of the leaf, also known as the second Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, or as you may know her, Helena, but you may know me by a different name. That being Ka-san. First off, I want you to know that I am sorry that I wasn't able to be there to watch you grow up and become the great man I know you will one day. But there were complications during the birth, and with Kyuubi escaping the seal, my body wasn't going to hold out from the stress. I didn't want to leave you alone and to the life of a Jinchuriki. I did everything I could think of to stop your father from making you a Jinchuriki. I even begged him, and you should know I never beg anyone for anything, to seal her back into me. But I guess what's done is done, but I want you to know I love you with all my heart, so please don't doubt for a second that I don't. I first met your father in the academy when I was being picked on by a bunch of kids. They were calling me tomato. Something you should never call me if you value your life. Here there was a threatening fist drawn and Naruto started to sweat a bit as he felt a shiver go down his spine. Due to my at the time round face and bright red hair. Needless to say I beat the shit out of them, both figuratively and literally. Afterwards your father approached me and I, thinking that he would start picking on me as well, punched him and ran. 2 months later I was kidnapped from my home by Kumo Shinobi, who were going to take me back to their village due to me having a unique kind of chakra, and could use a rare trait called chakra chains, thus controlling Kyuubi's chakra. But back to what happened. I was being dragged away in ropes and was leaving strands of my red hair in hopes that someone would find them and by proxy find me. Someone did, though not who I was expecting. Your father, who had been taking an evening stroll, had seen my red hair and tracked me down. I initially thought that he was a wimp because he usually stayed away from violence during the academy. But I was proven wrong when I saw him fight. When he had heard their plan for me, it was like someone unleashed a dam of anger. Because he was just starting to learn ninjutsu for the first time, he wasn't very good with it, but it was his taijutsu that was amazing. He was taking out the Kumo Shinobi left and right. It all happened so fast that I couldn't really see it, but I heard the screams. I won't go into details, but it wasn't pleasant. It was during that night that I started to fall for him, and I confessed 2 years later, after telling him about Helena. I was so afraid that he would start to hate me and call me names, but he didn't. All he did was embrace me and tell me that he knew the difference between a kunai and a scroll. I confessed right after that, and he did the same for me. It was 8 years later that we were married, and not long after we had you. I was so happy that I was going to become a mother. I rushed home and told Minato-kun the news, and you should have seen him. He was bouncing off the walls with happiness. It was 10 months after that you were born. Yes, you read right, 10 months of pregnancy. It's the side effect for being a female Jinchuriki, and all what I said before happened. When I got to the place he ruled and found out that your father was a god, I couldn't believe it. The man I had fallen for was a god. I almost strangled him for not telling me that he was married before when I found out about that. Turns out that his first wife is bi, and as it turns out I am too. Naruto began blushing at this. It was a bit of a surprise when I found out that particular fact, but that didn't stop us from beating him until he was nothing but a lump on the floor for not telling us. His sweat dropped here. I guess Ka-san doesn't like to have secrets kept from her, he thought. In the other scroll that I left you is the rest of the Uzumaki fortune. There isn't much, but it should keep both you and Konan-san going for a while since it was converted into the currency of that world. But in the one you found this note in, there are several of my own water jutsu, my main element, and several more common ones. There is also information on the Uzumaki bloodline in the scroll with an eye that has rings around the pupil. The bloodline is called the Rinnegan, and you, my dear boy, activated it during that mission, and are now the proud wielder of the most famous dojutsu. Now he was gaping about the information that had just been given. But don't let that fact go to your head, because if it does I will personally drag you back here and beat it out of you. Naruto's eyes went wide and he gulped in fear. However, I can't tell you what god your father is, just know that he is one of the big three, and that until you get to that camp half-blood place he won't reveal who he is. Just know that he is a great man who loves you enough to make an entire world think that he gave his life for you. Also, before I finish this, I want you to know that you have a way to get back to the Shinobi world. It's half an amulet that has the power to travel the realms, but be warned because it only works twice, so you only get one round trip. Just wipe a bit of your blood across the center of the ceiling array onto the back and think of the place you want to be transported to. Also, it has a second ability of allowing its user to talk to sealed souls. I once allowed Minato-kun to use it to talk to Helena-chan, and it sucked his body into my mindscape. But don't worry, all you'll need to do to get out is just think the words, outside, and you'll be able to leave. And to use it to talk to a sealed spirit, hold it to the sealed area and think, talk. The amulet itself is in the seal on the very bottom of the page. Well, I guess that's it for now, but please remember I will always love you. Love. Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze, your loving Ka-san. Peace. When it comes to women, we are always right. Remember that. Naruto, even if he sweat dropped at the postscript, had tears streaming down his face at his mother's last words to him. Even though he had been assured numerous times that Kushina had loved him by Helena, he had always had a lingering feeling of doubt in his mind, and now having Helena proved right, he was now the happiest kid in the world. As he wiped his tears away and looked over to Conan, who was smiling gently at him, she could understand the feeling of hearing a parent's first and last words to you. As Naruto wiped the tears from his face, he reached over to his father's scrolls, and picked up the closest one, biting his thumb again and swiped the blood across the seal. In a small poof of smoke there was another note, and this scroll also had 3 seals on it going from top to bottom. He picked up his father's letter and read it. Naruto, before I begin I must ask you to forgive me for sealing Helena into you, but there was no other way without revealing myself. If you're wondering who I am, I can't tell you my real name. However, I can tell you the name of the human form I was in during my time in Konoha. It was Minato Namikaze, the yellow flash of the leaf. Once again I must ask for your forgiveness, I had no other choice. I couldn't seal Kyuubi into your mother because it would have upset the balance of the worlds, and I couldn't ask another family to sacrifice their child if I couldn't do the same. I'm extremely sorry for what the Leaf Village has done to you for my actions on that night, and can never fully express how sorry I am. I'm sure your mother explained how we met and all that, so I won't go into it, but I must say I have had many regrets in my long life, and one of the few things I will never regret is falling in love with Kushina and creating you. But what I do regret is not being able to take you with me and letting you be raised in Camp Half-Blood, but the other gods decided to seal the realm away, preventing my being able to go back to claim you. Inside the other scrolls are many of the jutsu I have created, as well as the means for you to learn them. I have given you a magic item as well, but it won't unlock until you enter the camp, but I figured you might want to know. I have also included, since you have unlocked the Rinnegan and since can thus sign numerous summoning contracts. Naruto's eyes widened at the prospect of signing other contracts than the Fox Clan's, several contracts that I think would be useful to you. Be warned though, many of them, such as the dragons, can be very temperamental, so be careful in how you greet each of the clan leaders. The ones I have given you that are sealed into this scroll include the Dragon Clan, the Basilisk. No, this is not the Snake Clan that Orochimaru has. The Eagles, the Sharks. Trust me, oversea quests can be a pain if you don't have a means of transport. The Hellhounds of the Underworld, don't ask. And finally the Polar Bear Clan, in case you go somewhere with snow and you can't get through it. I expect you to go back to the Shinobi world at some point to get the Toad contract from my sensei Jiraiya. He's also your godfather. Just so you know, he really wanted to be in your life but couldn't due to the civilian council threatening both him and Tsunade, your godmother, with your life, so they would stay away from you, so please don't hate them. The reason for the Toads is that with their use of senjutsu, the ability to take in the chakra in the area around them and combine it with their own, makes them one of, if not the strongest summoning clan, with the foxes and dragons coming in the respective places of second and third. The last of the scrolls contains the small fortune I made during my time in the Leaf. It's not much, but it should hold you and Conan-san for a while, and like your mother's, it was converted into this world's currency. This is all that I can do for you, I'm afraid. So do me proud, son, and when the time is right I will personally claim you at Camp Half-Blood. Sincerely, your father, Minato Namikaze. Peace. I have included a technique that can let you see where your cousin Percy is and what his condition is. Just to make it easier in the mission I gave you. PPS. Listen to the women in your life. They are always right. Naruto only had one thought about the end postscript: Dad is totally and utterly whipped. The underworld. That's right, Naru-chan, your father is completely whipped. Kushina said, viewing what was going on with her son, and Persephone, who had joined them, was right beside her, nodding in agreement. Hades, however, was in a corner in the fetal position, rocking back and forth, crying waterfall tears, and he was muttering quietly, all that freedom I had, it was so good. Why did I have to get married? What was that? The two women asked. Apparently he hadn't been quiet enough. Nothing, he said as he continued to rock himself in his corner. Good, they both said, and went back to watching Naruto. Yahiko, who was watching all this, just sweat dropped and went back to watching his son. Back with Naruto. Why do I get the feeling I'm making Dad rock in a corner and cry about losing his freedom? Naruto thought, but his thoughts soon changed to the matter of the Rinnegan. He handed the letter to Konan so she could read it and picked up the one that had the mark of an eye with rings around the pupil. He again bit his thumb and wiped the blood on the seal, causing the scroll to open, and he immediately began reading it. To the one reading this, I would like to congratulate you for unlocking the famed dojutsu of the Uzumaki called the Rinnegan. Doing so, you have began the first step of your family's legacy. The history of how the Rinnegan originated isn't exactly clear because it is rare for an Uzumaki to unlock it. It has many times been thought of as a myth, and several in the clan have thought that it was just a mutation in the genetics of the clan. But what is clear is that it was the Dujutsu of the Rikudo Sennin or Sage of Six Paths and the first clan head of the Uzumaki. Legends say that he was blessed with all the powers of the gods in order for him to stop a beast that was rampaging across the continent. The beast he supposedly stopped was called the 10 Tails and was supposedly split into the 9 creatures that would later be called the Tailed Beasts. Naruto's eyes widened, and he could have sworn he heard Helena mutter, "You have no idea how right that legend is." The Rinnegan has 5 levels or stages somewhat like the Sharingan of the Uchiha clan, and like the Sharingan gaining new tomes around the pupil, the Rinnegan gains a new ring at every new level. Rinnegan stages. First level starts with 1 ring around the pupil, all 5 elements, and gravity manipulation unlocked. Able to use 2 paths. The Diva path, which is the ability to be able to use gravity ninjutsu, and the Animal path, which grants the ability to summon any number of animal. Thus the user can also sign any number of summoning contracts. The user and all the paths can also make metallic rods made of chakra, or as they are known, chakra rods. Second level gains a second ring around the pupil. The ability of connected eyesight is unlocked, meaning all the paths share linked vision with the user. 2 more paths are unlocked. Asura, the ability to summon mechanized body armor to augment itself, and the human, the ability to read someone's mind as well as remove the soul from the body. Third level, the Rinnegan turns blue and gains a 3rd ring around the pupil. The final 2 paths of pain are unlocked, those being the Preta, which grants the user the ability to absorb any amount of chakra in any form, ninjutsu included, and the Naraka path, which grants the user 2 abilities to raise the dead called restoration, if they've only been dead for a short amount of time, by using the King of Hell, and the power of interrogation using the same means. 4th level, the final ring forms on the outermost edge of the eye and begins to glow slightly. The unlocking of the 4th level grants the user a slightly advanced healing ability. This also grants the other paths the ability to summon the outer path, which is the user's main body. 5th and final level, this is the most powerful level that one with the Rinnegan can achieve. When reached, the appearance of the Rinnegan and its user changes drastically. The Rinnegan turns a bright gold in color, and the rings around the eyes become blue. The user, when using the Rinnegan, gains horns made from solidified chakra on their head and tome-like seals just below their neck. This level also greatly enhances the path's abilities as well, though how much remains to be seen. Many claim that this is similar to the Mangekyo Sharingan, as it is unclear as to how one can achieve it, and the only one who has was again the Rikudo Sennin. This level also grants the user and whomever she so chooses eternal youth. And it would normally take years, decades even, to reach any one of the levels past the first. Signed, Takeshi Uzumaki, 8th clan head of the Uzumaki. Naruto's eyes could have been rolling on the floor by now because with every word he took in they had gotten steadily wider. My Dujutsu is that powerful? Oh man, if the village knew about this then they'd shit themselves. He thought, a smirk forming on his face. Oh well, they had their chance. He thought a little darkly. Just as he was about to reach for the last of his mother's scrolls, he yawned, causing Konan to look up from Minato's letter, and then look at the time. She raised a brow at seeing that it was past midnight and put the scroll down as she got up. Alright Naruto, it's time for bed, she said, causing Naruto to look at her surprised. But I wanted to read the rest of the scrolls. He whined. He is still only 7 at this point, soon to be 8. No buts, you've had a rough day and you can finish them tomorrow, Konan said, causing him to look down. Yes, Ka-san, he muttered, going to go change into his night cloths. 4 years later. It had been 4 years since Naruto and Konan arrived in this new world, and they had adjusted quite well. Despite having not known what cars, computers or things like that were, Konan had started to study up on them, and after some trial and error, and by error I mean near wrecks, and other near debilitating things, she had gotten a driver's license, a computer and cell phone for each of them, and a small apartment. The apartment wasn't that big, but it held 2 bedrooms, a bath, a small kitchen, and other suitable appliances. The money that Minato and Kushina gave them hadn't lasted long, and it was mostly used in buying the apartment and what they needed for it. So Konan had found a job in a place called Grand Central Station selling candy in a shop called Sweet on America. It was through this that they discovered Naruto's sweet tooth the first day that she had brought home a bag of free samples. It was also through this that she had met the target's mother, Sally Jackson. She was a beautiful woman of the age of 30, had brown hair and eyes that changed colors depending on her mood. They had also found out that Naruto had a knack for gambling because the first time Conan had played poker with him, she had heard that it was a fun game of cards. She had been utterly defeated, and then again and again, one loss after another. They had even gone to a casino once, transformed of curse, and taken home a good portion of what was inside the safe. So it goes without saying that they were pretty secure financially. The training that Naruto had been doing since arriving had been worse than it was before, and the worst part is that he was doing it to himself. Conan, being busy with work most of the time, could only train him on her days off and her vacation days, so he had taken the liberty to train himself. He had increased his gravity seals to 4 times what normal gravity was, and was now starting to lift boulders while he had them on. The chakra control exercises had to be redone because when he had activated the Rinnegan, his reserves had become even more monstrous than they were already. The elemental exercises had been going well. His wind, fire, and lightning affinities were stronger than ever, while his water, earth, and gravity manipulation were following close behind. He had learned the Rasengan, and several others of the ninjutsu his parents had left him. He was working on getting the Hireishin down and could use it to some extent, but not to the level Minato could in the elemental nations, and for some reason his version of it flashed black with flickers of red. The path training was a little better than the Hireishin. It was a miracle that through sheer will and the mass spanning of shadow clones that he had gotten his Rinnegan to level 2, so he was able to use the Diva, Animal, Asura, and the human paths. He was good in their use and was getting better with each passing day. He had also found something in the Rinnegan scroll that greatly intrigued and disturbed him at the same time. It had said that one could separate the path's abilities to different bodies, while the main body could still use them on its own. Though that was the part that was intriguing, the disturbing part was that it also said that one could use dead bodies for the technique as well, and that at least 2 of them had to be such if he were to do that. Naruto, after some convincing on Conan's part, had decided to use Yahiko's and Nagato's bodies as the Diva and Animal paths while the rest were blood clones. It took some getting used to, and he normally kept the 2 bodies in a scroll sealed inside his arm. The linked vision also took some getting used to, especially with all the headaches he had until he did. As for Naruto's schooling, he had been attending Yancy Academy for the last few years. He was a few months older than the rest of his class due to having just turned 8 when he started there. He was also the mystery student of the class, as he wore a mask over the lower part of his face. To prevent questions, he claimed to have a bad scar across it and didn't want to show it. He was also late by 20 minutes to each class. When asked why, he usually had a bad and unbelievable lie, and would then proceed to take his seat and pull out a bright orange book. But it was his personality that had everyone confused. Sometimes he would act clueless and hyperactive, but other times he would be calm, collected, and downright lazy. Yet despite all this, he still got decent grades. They weren't the best, but hey, whose is these days? All this combined with the mystery that was his face, Naruto had quickly become that class, the school heartthrob. While most guys were jealous of him, for Naruto himself it was an absolute nightmare. The girls of the school would oftentimes try to ask him out, try to pull his mask down when they were on the bus. They almost succeeded once, and one time he had even caught a few of them trying to follow him into the showers after gym class. It was the start of another school year at Yancy, and he was sure it would be just as nightmarish as ever, when he started to feel a very high chakra signature. He and Conan had found that while chakra existed in this world, it was mostly used by demigods, and half the time they didn't know that they were using it. But this chakra felt big, almost as high as his own was before it had been increased by the Rinnegan, and the weird thing is it felt like it was flowing like water. Not as high as he had. It says almost because it high than Jonin, but lower than Cage. Thinking that it might be his charge, Naruto decided to take a detour into the restroom, and locked himself in one of the stalls. He did a few hand signs and whispered, "Detection of the target jutsu." And almost instantly Naruto knew where Percy was. Little did it surprise him that it was indeed Percy's chakra that he was detecting, and it was in his first class of the day too, that being algebra. Though he also felt a foul chakra coming from there as well. Looking further with the jutsu, he saw that it was the teacher of the class, a new one, Mrs. Dodds if he was right, And if he was right, then Mrs. Dodds was a monster, a high-level monster as well. So not only do I get to meet Percy today, but I'll end up meeting my first monster too, he thought before he smirked. It's been a while since I played a prank, let's see if I still got it. 20 minutes later, Nancy Bobofit, the voice of Mrs. Dodds, called, getting a girl with red curly hair to raise her hand and say, "Here." "Grover Underwood?" she called with a little disdain. And she got a reply from the scrawny kid with curly brown hair. "Percy Jackson," the teacher called again with an almost venomous voice, causing said boy to look up from his desk and call out, "Here." She glared at the boy a bit before turning back to her list. "Naruto Uzumaki?" she called out, making the room go deathly silence as there was no answer. "Naruto Uzumaki," she said again, a bit more forced this time. Now the class was starting to whisper among themselves, "He's late again?" And on the first day? One student asked behind Percy, drawing his attention. "Well, what do you expect? Ever since he's come here he's late for every class but one." Another said, making Percy listen in curiosity. "Wonder what excuse he'll come up with this time." "You think it'll be the one where the black cat got in his path and he had to take the long way around?" the first kid asked, making the other snort. "No, I think it'll be the one where he had to help the old lady with her bags," he said, causing Percy to just look dumbfounded. Just who is this guy? And why do people keep talking like this has happened every day for the last 4 years? He thought to himself. He turned to the person sitting next to him, a girl, and whispered to her, "Just who is this Naruto Uzumaki guy?" he asked, causing the girl to look at him a bit before she gained a dreamy look. "Only the most mysterious guy in this school. He wears this mask claiming to have a scar on his face he doesn't want people to see. And is always 20 minutes late to every class except for Greek mythology for some reason. Every time he's asked why he's late he just shrugs his shoulders and tells a really lame lie, but the teachers don't press the matter anymore," she said before snapping out of her funk and turning back to the front of the room. Percy, getting the message to not talk to the girl anymore, just shrugged and turned back to the front as well. Just as the lesson was about to start, the door opened, causing everyone to look over at it, and who everyone saw walk in was a tall, spiky, blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid, who had a mask on the lower part of his face. He also had his hair down to his neck and looked a little lazy. "And just who are you?" Mrs. Dodds asked, angry that her lesson was interrupted before it could even start. "Naruto Uzumaki," he said, staring at her lazily. "Then would you mind telling me why you are 20 minutes late?" she asked, making all the students minus Percy hold their breath. "I ran into a nice old lady who had trouble with her bags, and being the nice person I am, I just had to help her with them. And then as I was walking from there, a black cat crossed my path and I had to take the long way around," he said, causing the two boys who had bet on which of the two he would use jaws to drop and hit the desk. And with that, Naruto went to his desk, which just so happened to be on the other side of Percy, sat down and took out his orange book. "The Shinobi World. And tell me why I should help you find this boy that you say went mission 7 years ago?" a 13-year-old blonde-haired, purple-eyed priestess asked to a group of shinobi with whirlpool headbands. These shinobi were Kakashi Hitaki, Kurenai Yuhi, Jiraiya, Tsunade, Shizune, who had Tauntaun in her arms like always, and Hiruzen Sarutobi, the new Shodem Azukage. "Because we have looked everywhere else that we can think she and Dono, we are getting desperate to find him," Sarutobi said with a worried look. It was true too, they had, and they were beginning to lose hope. Shein, however, could have cared less if it was a day ago, but earlier this morning she had had a vision of a blonde-haired kid with whisker marks on his face, fighting with someone with red hair who also had whisker marks, so she was somewhat curious of the blonde one and how he could be so powerful. She sighed as she nodded, "Very well, if I'm the only one left who can, then I'll try to find him. Though I have a good idea to where he is," she said, and then thought the last part as she began going through hand signs. "There's one place that has recently been giving me more visions than normal, so I'll check there first," she said, making everyone nod. Meanwhile, everyone was having their own thought as to what Naruto would look like now and how well he would be. Please let him be like me, and having followed in the way of the Provenus. Kakashi thought. He was the one out of them all that had spent the most time near and with Naruto in his Anbu days. "I just want to know if he's alright," Hiruzen thought. "Please, Conan-chan, let him read my books." Jiraiya thought, since for some reason it was Conan who had enjoyed his books when he was training the 3 orphans. "Please don't let him be like all men and having fallen into the ways of the Provenus." The women thought. Oink, oink, Tauntaun thought. Dimensional viewing jutsu. Shion called out as she finished her hand signs. Then a circular bubble appeared in the middle of the room and they saw the inside of a classroom, and the teacher was going through the roll call. They heard a bunch of names they didn't recognize until they heard one that was very familiar to them. Naruto Uzumaki. The teacher called, and got no response other than the room getting quiet. The teacher called for Naruto again, and didn't get a response then either. She went on with the other names on the list. When she had finished, she had just turned to begin the lesson. The door opened and in came a figure that was familiar to the shinobi, but he was masked. Score 1 for me, Kakashi thought as he saw the mask. Oh come on, not a mask, everyone else thought, before everyone heard the teacher ask, would you mind telling me why you're 20 minutes late to class? The shinobi perked up as Kakashi again ticked a victory for himself. I ran into a nice old lady who had trouble with her bags, and being the nice person I am, I just had to help her with them. And then as I was walking from there, a black cat crossed my path and I had to take the long way around. They heard Naruto reply and saw him walk to his desk and pull an orange book out of his pocket. Everything froze. The girls were staring at the guys who were staring at Kakashi, who in turn was staring at the bubble, and they could tell that it was an extremely proud stare. You could have heard a pin drop before Kakashi shouted, "Yes, go Naruto. You followed in my footsteps, Outo. I couldn't be any prouder." He shouted and was going to say more until he was punched in the head by every female in the room, Shion included. "You bastard, you turned my godson into a pervert." Tsunade shouted in rage, not knowing that he got the book from Conan. Back with Naruto. Naruto shivered a bit as he got the feeling that he had caused someone a great deal of pain just now. Why do I get the feeling that Inu Nissan is getting his head pounded by a big-breasted woman for what I just said? He thought, as he pretended to read. He never really started to really read the books until he was sure the teachers were into the lesson, which Mrs. Dodds was at the moment, but he was taking the opportunity to check on his charge. He saw that Percy looked to be at least 12 years old, had black hair, and sea-green eyes, and the feeling of his chakra was defiantly that of a very powerful water affinity. So he's the son of the sea god Poseidon then, if the feel of his chakra is to go by. He thought. Looking at the time he smirked, well then I guess I can set the prank to bed, and he thought as the class was boring anyway. He channeled a small amount of chakra into a seal on his upper right arm. It wasn't enough chakra to really be noticeable, but if one were to look closely enough they would see Mrs. Dodds and Grover stiffen ever so slightly. That power, where's it coming from? Mrs. Dodds thought, taking a small sniff, and caught the scent of it coming from Naruto, so he already knows how to access his powers, does he? It doesn't look like the other one has even realized what he's capable of yet. Well, I'll have to take care of them both then, she thought sinisterly as she continued with the lesson. Where's that power coming from? Grover thought nervously, looking around. His eyes widened as he could almost see the small wisps of it coming from Naruto, and at the moment the smell of it was almost overpowering. What the? How is he able to use his power this early? I only just recognized him and Percy as demigods, and I've never seen him at camp, so how can he have training in how to control it? He thought worriedly. By the smell, he and Percy are two of the strongest demigods out there. Oh man, first I had to find Talia, and now I find these two? My life sucks. He though deprecatingly, never having gotten over how he had failed to save Talia from becoming a tree. As he channeled chakra to the seal, Naruto noticed Mrs. Dodds and Grover stiffened slightly, so I was right about her. But I think that by the smell of goats on the Underwood kid that he might be a satyr. He thought. He finished channeling chakra into the seal that was connected to the one that would start the prank in the teacher's lounge the instant Mrs. Dodds walked in. It was the end of the day and the students were just going back to their dorms, when everyone heard a big boom, and then there were several screams coming from the teacher's lounge. The next thing anyone knew was that there were the teachers rushing out of it, and they had had glue dumped on them and then proceeded to have feathers of every color dropped on top of those. They all looked like giant colorful chickens. If one were to be right next to Naruto, they could hear him mutter, "I still got it," and hear him barely restraining his laughter. The next day it turned out that the mythology teacher had had a nervous breakdown due to the feather incident, as it had come to be known, and a new teacher had been chosen. A new one by the name Mr. Brunner, an older man who had a scraggly beard, and had to move around in a wheelchair. Though he smelled off to Naruto, instead of smelling like a regular human, he smelled of horses. And not like someone who was around them all the time. The smell was coming off him, meaning that was his natural scent. Well, I guess it could be worse. It could have been a sea monster. Naruto thought sarcastically as he caught sight of him. As the new teacher rolled himself into the room and turned to the class with a bright smile. Hello everyone. My name is Mr. Brunner, and due to the little incident that happened yesterday in the teacher's lounge, your previous teacher has decided to retire, so I'll be taking over the classroom for the rest of the year. He said as his eyes roamed around the room, mostly over Naruto and Percy, before he discreetly turned to Grover, who nodded when he saw the look he was being sent. So these are the two the Grover told me about, Naruto Uzumaki Hurricane. Wonder why he has two last names. And Percy Jackson, Brunner thought, before he cleared his throat, drawing back some of the attention that had started to wonder. Now as I don't know any of you, I would like for you all when I call your names to stand and tell me about yourselves. He said, and started calling names. They were all the same with some variants to their dreams and what they liked, but it was mostly to grow up and either become rich and famous or raise a family. However, when he reached Naruto's name, everything became deathly still. Naruto Uzumaki Hurricane. But before you begin, why are you wearing a mask? Brunner asked with a raised brow. Naruto sighed and just shrugged. Honestly sir, I've got a bad scare across my face and I don't want to show it anyone. He said, making Brunner nod, before he stood up to begin his introduction. My name is Naruto Uzumaki Hurricane. Knowing anything else about me wouldn't help you understand me. Because I have gone through pain like no other time and time again. So you wouldn't understand what my life has been like, and even if you did go through my pain you still wouldn't understand me. Because everyone deals with pain differently, so there is no way you'd be able to understand it and still be sane. I guess my dream would be to make my fathers proud of me, whoever one of them may be. He finished with a pointed look to Brunner that clearly said, I know I'm a demigod. With that he sat down and brought his orange, Icha book out and ignored everything else. After Naruto's introduction everything was quiet. Many of the male students in the class had questions running through their heads, wondering just what he meant by that, while the girls had hearts in their eyes at his way of introducing himself. To them it added the hurting warrior thing to his mysteriousness. Okay, I was not expecting that. But what could have he gone through to cause such a dark outlook on life? And how in the 9 levels of hell does he know? Brunner thought, somewhat panicked at the end. That look, it's the same one I have sometimes. He's gone through a hard life. Percy thought, deciding that he had to get to know this kid. Grover's thoughts were unreadable to anyone. After class Naruto and Grover stayed behind, the latter looking a little nervous at the former. Brunner, seeing that he still had some students left, smiled. "Oh, what could I do for you two?" he asked, playing clueless. Naruto saw through the act immediately and frowned at the teacher. "You can drop the act. I know that both you and Grover are here to watch over me and Percy Jackson, Centaur," he said with a pause at the end before he let the last word through his mouth. Now they were both surprised at the fact that Naruto knew about them. "I don't know what you're talking about," Brunner said, and he looked a little nervous, Grover being too shocked to say or do anything. Seeing that he was playing stupid, Naruto blasted him with a quick dose of killing intent, startling them both, making Brunner widen his eyes and Grover to almost faint. "Don't play stupid with me, horseman. I will have you know anyone with a heightened sense of smell can tell that you smell of nothing but horses, and Grover smells like goats," he said with a glare to the now somewhat scared teacher. Brunner sighed as he realized that he was caught. "Very well, what do you want to know?" he asked, thinking that Naruto wanted information. Said boy smirked before he shook his head. "It's not what I want to know, it's what I can tell you." "But I want to know something before I tell you what I know," he said, surprising the two even more. "And what would that be?" Brunner asked, curiously. "What do you know of the Shinobi world?" Naruto asked. The teacher looked surprised, before he gained a look of remembrance, and Grover looked interested. It was a world where seemingly regular people were capable of great feats. He started, making Grover look a little surprised and Naruto to nod. The warriors, who were known as ninja, or as you put it shinobi, were able to wield the elements as if it was second nature to them. The gods were able to travel between this world and the shinobi world, and they sired children there as well. He continued, further surprising Grover and making Naruto nod again. The children of the gods mixed with shinobi were able to become even stronger than the shinobi of that world and the demigods of this world. But for some reason the energies that the ninja could use, called chakra, mixed strangely with that of the gods, and some of the ninja developed what were called kekia genkei, or in English bloodline limits, and created an even more powerful breed than what was the norm in that world. Those bloodlines created ninja clans, like the Uchiha who had the Sharingan A Dujutsu able to copy just about anything, the Hyuga whose Byakugan eye could see almost 360 degrees around them and through just about anything, Senju who had perfect chakra control and could control the wood element, and the Uzumaki. He trailed as his eyes widened comically in realization. Naruto merrily smirked and nodded his head. Grover looked confused before he gave a look of realization himself. "Hey, are you telling me that you're from this other world?" he asked shakily, making Naruto nod again, before he turned to Brunner who was just staring at Naruto in disbelief. "See Kirin, sir?" he asked as he had never seen him like this. How is this possible? The Shinobi world was sealed off 12, almost 13, years ago. The now renamed Kirin stuttered out looking confused. Naruto smirked again but shook his head. "To be honest, I really don't understand it myself, neither does my mother, but I can tell you what happened and how I'm here if you want, seeing as this was the last class of the day, and I've got time to kill," he suggested. Kirin, seeing that it was the best way to get answers, nodded. But before they could continue, Naruto went to the closed door and placed a piece of paper that had a weird symbol on it, and stuck it to the door and focused chakra into it. The room glowed blue for a moment, and when it died down, Naruto turned back to the now remembering, impressed centaur, and stunned satyr. While all this had gone on, they were thinking, so he's good at sealing arts then, just like a true Uzumaki. Been a while since I've actually felt chakra being willingly used by a mortal though. Most demigods force their powers to work, but Naruto, it seems, can expertly manipulate his. Were Chiron's thoughts. That power, it was the same as yesterday. Is this the chakra thing that Kirin was talking about? Grover thought as he looked between the two, to see that Kirin had an impressed look and Naruto who was looking confused at them. "What?" Naruto asked, getting a little tired of the looks. "Nothing, it's just been a few millennia since I've seen a ninja at work," Kirin said, and Grover didn't say anything, still too stunned to do much. "Naruto, before you tell your story, I know that Shinobi were trained to kill their enemies, and if you're from that world then I must ask, have you ever killed?" Kirin asked in utmost seriousness, drawing a look of shock and surprise from Grover. Satyrs valued all life, be it human or nature life, and found it repulsive to kill anything but the monsters of the underworld because they would reform given enough time. So he couldn't understand why someone would willingly take a life. Naruto didn't answer right away as the question brought up bad memories of that mission, and he seemed to be lost in the past. Eventually he sighed and looked at Kirin sadly. "If I answer that, what your opinion of me be?" he asked. Kirin looked at him and saw that this was possibly a question that was related to his introduction. He sighed as it obviously brought up bad memories, but if Naruto was a possible camper, he needed to know if he had or not. "To tell you the truth, depending on why it was you killed, if you have that is, I would either tell you to get out and never show you face to me again, or I would give you my sympathies and give you some advice a ninja once gave me," he said, making Naruto flinch a bit but sigh and nod nonetheless. "Yes, I have killed," he said in a quiet voice, making Grover widen his eyes, but Kirin nodded and asked in an equally quiet voice, "What led you to do so and who did you kill?" "Before I tell you who it was, you must know that we were captured by the enemy and he tricked me saying that he would spare both myself and my mother, who was part of that group, if I did it," Naruto said sadly, making Kirin nod. "I understand, but please, who was it?" Kirin asked. Naruto flinched again and tears began to well in his eyes. "It was my father," he said and looked away. Both of the listeners were stunned. Naruto had been forced to kill his father? Well, not his real father, but the closest thing to it. Thinking it over, they really couldn't blame him since he had been tricked into it by being told that he and his mother would live if he did so. "Naruto," Kirin said quietly, causing him to slowly turn his head to him, "you have my sympathies," he said, causing Naruto to quietly sigh in relief. "If you wanted, I have some advice so you can sleep easily at night," he told him, making Naruto shake his head. "It's alright, sir, my mother told me as long as I don't start enjoying my kills and still feel remorse for the ones I do, then I'm still human, it helps with the nightmares," he said, causing Kirin to nod. "Now your story," he said, getting Grover to look interested, and Naruto nodded before he told them his tale. Half-hour later, after he was done, they stared at him amazed that he had gone through so much and could still be like he is today. "Wow," was what escaped Grover's mouth, and getting a nod of agreement from Kirin. "Wow, indeed," He said, "It amazes me that all that would happen to you in so little time and that you wound up here after that chakra's shock wave weakened the seal over the realms enough for your father to feel it and bring you and your mother here." He had told them everything except that he had unlocked the Rinnegan. "Trust me, I was just as surprised as you were to learn that my real dad was a god and that his human form had been the leader of the village I was born in." Naruto chuckled. "Even though I wish that I was told which one, I can tell you this," Naruto said, making them lean in anticipation. "Both me and Percy are children of the Big Three," he said in complete seriousness. Their eyes were wide now. If they were both children of the Big Three, then they needed to get them to camp as soon as possible. Naruto, seeing what they were thinking, glared at them. "I know what you're thinking, and you will not be taking us to camp just yet," he said. His statement made Grover stare at him. "But Naruto, if what you say is true, then we need to get you both to safety," he said, not understanding what Naruto was doing. Chiron, however, had an idea and he voiced it. "You're trying to see what Mrs. Dodds wants, aren't you?" he asked, making Naruto nod. "Yes, I know she is here for a reason, and it's defiantly not to teach. But if you'll excuse me, I have training I need to get to," he said as he turned to the door but stopped before he took the silencing tag down. "Oh, by the way, while I don't have a clue as to which one my dad is, I have a feeling that based on Percy's chakra, he might be Poseidon's son," he said, and ripped the tag off the door and walked away, leaving them to their thoughts. After he had left, Grover turned to Chiron, who looked thoughtful, and asked, "Is it possible that Percy really is Poseidon's son?" he asked, making Chiron nod. "It is all but impossible now that I think about it, Grover. I mean, look at his hair, it's black just like Poseidon's, his eyes sea green like Poseidon's, he even gets that brooding look that Poseidon gets at times," Chiron explained. "And from what I remember about one's chakra, with the limited knowledge I have of the subject, its affinity is usually decided by what one the father of the child has. It's still rare to get the same one, but it is usually an element that is close to the father's own, or, if they have the same, it is usually weaker than the father's," he finished, making Grover nod but sigh. "First I find Talia, and now I find Naruto and Percy, and all three children of the Big Three. What is it with me?" he asked, depressed. Chiron merely chuckled at Grover's turn of luck. "I must say you do have an unusual gift for finding strong demigod, Grover," he said, drawing a deadpanned look. "Form," said Sator, "that doesn't help, sir." "With Naruto? Well, it could have been worse," Naruto said as he walked into the forest that surrounded the school. "Most of the kids that came here lived on the campus, him and Percy included. Naruto because he wanted to be there in case Percy was ever attacked, and Percy because his mom always put him in boarding schools." He sighed as he detected a presence a few feet behind, darting from tree to tree. "Does he really think that I'm that stupid?" He smirked slightly as he came to his usual training field he used when he was a school. It wasn't all that big, but it had what was needed for his purposes. He put his hands in the seal for his most used jutsu and made 40 shadow clones. He smirked again when there was an audible gasp from behind him, but he ignored it in favor of giving his clones orders. "Alright, I'm feeling a little tired today, so it's just chakra and elemental control for now. You all know what to do, so get to work," he ordered, before he disappeared from sight. 5 minutes beforehand. "Alright, time to get some answers," one Percy Jackson thought as he saw Naruto walking out of Mr. Brunner's classroom, with a tired look on his face, well, from what he could see of it anyway. So he followed him out of the school and over to the surrounding forest, and began using the surrounding trees for cover. He smirked a little when he hadn't been noticed, so he thought. He followed Naruto until he saw him stop and make an odd gesture with his hands. There were numerous puffs of smoke, and when it cleared, all he could is stare in shock. There were clones of the blonde, clones, damn it, clones. And quite a few of them too. What the hell? He thought in shock. He watched as the blonde gave out orders to the doppelgangers, something about chakra and element control. As the clones went to do what they needed, he saw the original just disappear. Where'd he go? He thought before he was tapped on the shoulder. He jumped a bit and turned around to see Naruto behind him with an eye smile. "Enjoying the show?" he asked. Percy just stood there with wide eyes. How are you able to do that?" he stuttered, pointing towards the clearing behind them to the clones that were now walking on trees, and doing other things. Naruto just raised an eyebrow before he said sheepishly, "Oh, I can use my body's natural energy to make all that stuff happen. And trust me, I can do a lot more than that," he said, turning serious at the end. Now Percy was even more surprised. The blonde mystery kid from his class could make copies of himself walk on trees parallel to the ground, and now he said he could do a lot more than that? Naturally, Percy did the only thing he could after learning something like this: he fainted. 8 months later, after Percy had regained his consciousness that day, had been assured that he wasn't crazy, and made to promise that he wouldn't tell a signal soul about what he had learned, he had started hanging out a lot with Naruto and they had become fast friends. Naruto, Percy learned, had been living with his mother since his dad died, just like he had, and that their mothers worked in the same place. He also learned that unlike his stepfather Gabe, that Naruto was a natural gambler. Naruto had even shown him most of the techniques that he was capable of. And had learned that Naruto was a natural prankster, and the one on the teacher's lounge the first day had been his doing. What Naruto learned about Percy was that he was often considered a troublemaker in his old schools because he would somehow get into odd situations that would ultimately get him expelled by the end of every school year. That his mom had married a really unlikable guy named Gabe Ugliano, someone Percy had nicknamed Smelly Gabe, who had apparently been nice to them for a few days before he had showed his real colors, and smelled, and often gambled their paychecks away and secretly thought himself as the gambling king. And Naruto had come up with a good way to get back at the guy, and had made a plan with Percy that the first time that he met him he would show him just who the real gambling king was. The two friends had also made friends with another person in the class, that being Grover Underwood. Naruto even managed to get both of them to join him on a few of his prank escapades. And the two had quickly become his permanent pranking partners. Grover, who at first had been a little shy and timid, had quickly found the joys of letting your frustrations out by said pranks, and Percy, who had already done some pranks in his life, really started to get into them now, and they were both becoming just as devious as Naruto was for scheming up said pranks, and soon after that the three had quickly become known as the pranksters of the school, though even if everyone knew it was them, no one was ever able to prove it was them. The two of them had at first been envious about his large number of fangirls, but after seeing what they had been trying to do to him, they had helped get him away from them, and said that if he ever needed their help again to just tell them. They had to do this on more than one occasion since then. Though currently they were on a field trip to the local mythology museum, and were standing in a crowded area with their class and two escorts, Mrs. Dodds and Mr. Brunner. Currently Mr. Brunner, Chiron, was currently lecturing the class on the stele or grave marker for a girl that had died over 2,000 years ago, and what the carvings on the sides meant. Naruto, knowing that they were no myths, tried to listen, as had Percy and Grover, but Nancy Bobofit and her friends kept making snide remarks about the pictures. Naruto, having already had his patience running low due to her snide remarks, snapped and rounded on her. "Would you just shut up?" he said fiercely but quietly, apparently not quietly enough, as everything turned quiet in the room. "Mr. Uzumaki." Mr. Brunner said. "Do you have a comment?" he asked. "No, sir," Naruto said indifferently, and Mr. Brunner pointed to a picture on the stele. "Then could you tell the class what this picture means?" he asked. Naruto took one look at it and said, "That would be Kronos, the king of the Titans, eating his children so that they wouldn't rise against him like he feared," he said, causing many of the ones who were listening to look at him blankly, and Mr. Brunner to nod before he turned to Percy. "Would you mind explaining what his actions lead to, Mr. Jackson?" he asked him. Percy, never having been good at anything school-related, raked his brain for anything that could be of use. Well, his actions lead his wife to hiding their youngest son, who was Zeus, and instead gave Kronos a rock to eat instead, and while Zeus was in hiding he was trained so that he could defeat Kronos, which he did after tricking him into barfing up his other kids. There were several girls muttering about how disgusting that Bito information was, and that ultimately lead to a war between the gods and the Titans, and the gods won, right? Percy asked nervously at the end, not sure whether or not he had gotten it right. Mr. Brunner nodded in acceptance. "That's right, Mr. Jackson, though you get half credit because you left out a few important details." He checked his wristwatch. "Now I do believe that it's time for launch. So Mrs. Dodds, could you lead us outside?" As everyone filed out, he called Naruto back, signaling his friends to go on ahead. Naruto turned back to Chiron. "I believe that Mrs. Dodds will reveal her intentions on this trip," he said, causing Naruto to nod. "I know, I felt her anger spike the last few days," he said. "I don't think it has anything to with me though, since most of it's directed at Percy," he said, causing Chiron to nod. "So any doubts about Percy being Poseidon's son?" he asked, getting a shake of the head from the centaur. I believe that it is very possible that he could be. After all, he does look a lot like him. But to be sure, we'll have to wait for him to be claimed at camp. However, if he is, Zeus will not be happy. Chiron said, getting a snort from Naruto, as if he has room to talk. He sired Talia, and neither of the other gods were happy with him either. He said, making Chiron look at him worriedly, Naruto, it would be best if you showed the gods some respect. He said with a worried glacé at the roof. Naruto shrugged his shoulders dismissively. They want my respect, they'll have to earn it. But as for Mrs. Dodds, since she doesn't seem to be after me, I think that I'll leave it to Percy, and if he can't handle it then I'll jump in. He said. Chiron nodded to the last bit. It would be for the best that way. I hadn't wanted him to discover his status as a demigod this way, but it seems as if we don't have any other choice. He said. Naruto nodded at him. If that's all, sir, I would like to go to lunch now. He said, getting Chiron to agree with him. When Naruto got outside, he noticed that Nancy Bobofit had dumped her lunch on Grover's lap, and was currently arguing with Percy about it. Naruto looked over to see Mrs. Dodds doing nothing but smirking at the scene. He looked back as he noticed Percy's chakras spike and the water in the fountain behind Nancy seemed to respond to it. The next thing anybody knew was that Nancy was inside the fountain soaked to the bone. He saw Mrs. Dodds go over to Percy and tell him to follow her. Grover tried to stop her by saying that he was the one to push Nancy into the fountain, only to shrink back as the monster teacher glared at him, and causing Percy to reassure him that he'd be fine. Naruto sighed as he watched her lead Percy back into the museum, and saw Grover looking at him pleadingly. He nodded, getting the message, and followed after them. What happens up to the point where Percy kills her? Naruto face-palmed as Percy swung the sword Chiron had thrown him, only to miss and nearly causing him to get shredded to bits. He would have too had Naruto not unsealed his own sword that he had found in one of his father's scrolls. Imagine Rebellion from Devil May Cry 4. And appeared in between them, blocking her claws from getting to his charge. They both looked surprised when Naruto stepped in and managed to block him. You know, I was wondering when you were going to reveal yourself. He said with a cocky smirk on his face, not that they could see as he had his mask on. Mrs. Dodds stared at him for a moment before she smirked sinisterly at him. So it was you that I felt releasing all that power over the months. She said, looking even more sinister. I was going to wait till after this trip to take care of you next, but I think that now would be the time to finish you. She said, taking flight. Naruto just rolled his eyes and looked back at Percy to see that he looked scared and confused at the same time. Percy, he said, getting him to look at him. What you're about to see is even better than what you have before, and trust me, way cooler too. So I'll get her down to the ground, and when I say you, finish her off. Got that? He asked, getting a nervous nod from him. Good, he said before he took out a three-pronged kunai, and threw it at the teacher now turned monster. Mrs. Dodds saw the kunai and dodged with a smirk. You think that a little knife like that will harm me? Think again, she said, and then saw Naruto do a half-hand seal and disappear in a black-red tinged flash of light. Then heard a shout of Rasengan, and then felt an immense pain in her back as something was slammed into her, and she went crashing to the floor. Percy, now, Naruto said as he landed beside him. Percy nodded and ran towards the teacher, raised the sword in his hands and then swung it down on her. With a cry of pain as the sword sliced through her, Mrs. Dodds dissolved into sand. All Percy did was stare in shock, and when he turned back to Naruto he saw that he was gone. He walked back outside and saw that everyone was still eating. Turning back to where he left Grover, he saw that Naruto was sitting next to him eating some ramen and laughing at a joke he had just told. Percy saw that Mr. Brunner was reading in the shade and walked over to him and handed him his pen back. Mr. Brunner took it and said, "Thank you, but I would appreciate it if you brought your own writing utensil from now on." He said, Sir?" Percy asked. "Where's Mrs. Dodds?" he asked, getting a confused look from the mythology teacher. "Who?" he asked. "The other escort, the pre-algebra teacher." Percy said, "Percy, there is no Mrs. Dodds on this trip. As far as I know, there has never been a Mrs. Dodds at Yancy Academy. Are you feeling alright?"
That's all for now. If you want to see next part, then please like this video and subscribe my channel. Thank you.